मदन सर, मदन सर जुड़ गए हैं क्या?
सर आवाज आ रही है मेरी?
हाँ आवाज आ रही है। मैं ये कह रहा था कि आपकी तरफ से रिकॉर्डिंग ऑन करवा दो सर।
हाँ, रिकॉर्डिंग ऑन
का ऑप्शन
यस सर करवा रहे हैं।
और को होस्ट किसको बनाना है तो एक बार उसको सुमुख को बोल दो। आप तो वो को होस्ट जो जो है ना आपको बना देगा, वो है अभी लाइन पे, है ना? और
ठीक।
यूट्यूब की लिंक शेयर कर दिए उन्होंने, है ना?
हाँ मैंने लिंक मिल गई है मुझे। मैं इसको थोड़ा सा ईमेल भी कर देता हूँ लिंक को, है ना?
हाँ हाँ, लेकिन क्या है कि जो जो लोग जुड़ रहे हैं ना, एक बार आप थोड़ा सा बता दो अभी किस किसको को होस्ट बनाना है।
को होस्ट दानिश इज देयर,
मैं भी हो ही
मुख,
रही हूँ बस।
एक रीना मैडम भी, जमरा मैडम ज्वाइन कर रहे हैं। मैं उनको एक बार इन्फॉर्म कर देता हूँ।
सुमुख सुन रहे हो ना आप? सुमुख?
हाँ सर, हाँ सर, सुन रहा हूँ।
हाँ सर, जैसे इसका बोले को होस्ट का, तो उनको को होस्ट बना देना और उनकी तरफ से जो भी को होस्ट रहेगा वो रिकॉर्डिंग कंप्यूटर में कर लेगा। सर जैसे ही रिकॉर्ड पे क्लिक करते हैं ना, तो रिकॉर्ड ऑन दिस कंप्यूटर करना आप, है ना?
रिकॉर्डिंग ऑन करोगे?
रिकॉर्डिंग आपके मेन में ऑन हो गई।
ऑन कर दी।
ये कर
रिकॉर्डिंग ऑन दिस कंप्यूटर, है ना? लेकिन थोड़ा सा ध्यान रखिएगा कि बीच में सिस्टम बंद नहीं हो। जिस भी कंप्यूटर पे आप रिकॉर्डिंग कर रहे हैं वो रेगुलर चले।
जी जी।
जो भी को होस्ट है उनको थोड़ा सा देख लीजिएगा किस किस को ऐड करना है।
ये हम लोगों को दिखेगा नहीं क्या? ये मुझे को होस्ट बनाइए इसमें। तो हाँ, तो चालू तो हो गया है लेकिन होस्ट वेबिनार हमारी। ये हो चुका है। कर दिया। ठीक है, वेटिंग रूम में ये दिख रहा है अपर्णा शर्मा। कौन सी मैम? यूट्यूब वाली शेयर हो गई है ना? ये मेल कर दी सर?
कोई बैकग्राउंड स्लाइड नहीं है क्या जो इस पे शेयर किया जा सके, ताकि वो स्पेस में इंस्टेड ऑफ नाम वो बैकग्राउंड स्लाइड आता?
हम्म।
ब्रोशर का जो फर्स्ट पेज था वो भी शेयर किया जा सकता है।
हाँ देखता हूँ, करते हैं क्या? तुम कर दो अगर वो वाला डाउनलोड करके सिर्फ शेयर पे डाल के।
मदन, हेलो।
Yes, Aparna.
मदन, इफ पॉसिबल अगर इसको कोई ये कर सकता हो, मतलब बिकॉज इट्स इन पीडीएफ, इसको कोई उसमें स्लाइड के अंदर कन्वर्ट करके फिर इसको अगर लगाते तो बेटर लगता है, बिकॉज अभी तो ये मतलब इट्स नॉट लुकिंग गुड, अच्छा नहीं दिख रहा है इधर से।
Aparna, this is right now fine.
host the PPTs, तो वो कर देंगे।
Because अभी मेरे पास ऐसा नहीं है. Let it be like this now.
ओके, फाइन फाइन।
एंट्री के लिए जो लोग आ रहे हैं देख लीजिए कौन। ओके
Pragyesh sir, very good morning.
हाँ, गुड मॉर्निंग मदन जी, कैसे हैं आप?
Sir, I'm good, sir. We are just waiting for commissioner, sir. Maybe he will.
बिल्कुल ठीक ठीक।
मोबाइल साइलेंट कर लेना।
Pragyesh sir, very good morning. Yes, Danish.
वाल्टर पार्क सर आ गए, हेलो बोल दो।
Professor Walter Park.
How are you? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. I am good. How are you, sir? Welcome to our webinar.
Yes. So this is a different city.
Yes, sir.
You're not. This is which city are you in?
Sir, right now, like, I'm in in Madhya Pradesh state. One place is there, that is Petlawad. So I am just associated with a particular college which comes under Madhya Pradesh Higher Education Department.
Okay.
We are just waiting for our guest of honor, and then we will formally start our session, sir.
Okay. Good. Good.
Good morning, Professor Park said. How are you, sir? This is Danish here, Shadab Danish.
Yeah. Yeah. How are you, Danish?
Yeah,
How are
I'm
you?
good, sir. How are you doing? It's a long time, huh? After a long time.
Yeah, long time. Are you following the news in the US?
Yeah, we were following very closely and
Yes.
very disheartening to know a lot of things. Yeah.
Yeah, we're setting a good example.
We and then you got an opportunity to set an example, and now I think the new improvement that is happening, maybe those things can help to bring back the old glory. Whatever. Yeah. How was this lockdown period, this 1 year? I mean, it must be difficult.
Well, where I live, it's pretty good. Where I live, there's no. I got tested last week, and I'm negative, and my children tested also. They're negative because college they test you. So I know there's a lot of tragedies, but in my area is okay. How about your area?
Fine, sir. Here also fine. Like I was all been there in campus only. I didn't go home these days. Yeah, so I was there in campus safe, but completely locked, disconnected from outer world. So that was a little difficult. But yeah, I was here in Indore.
Anish, sorry to interrupt. I think you can unmute our commissioners, additional commissioner sir is with us. Sir, can you hear us?
हाँ बैठ जाओ
सर आपका यूट्यूब पर आपका वॉइस सब बंद Sir, can you hear us, Commissioner sir?
कौन से न्यूज़पेपर से बना है नोट्स ये गवर्नमेंट की वो है
Walimbe sir, Chandrasekhar Walimbe, the Additional Commissioner Higher Education. I think sir has also joined us. Sir, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you, Dr. Manthan.
Yeah, sir.
Morning, sir. Pragesh here, sir. Good morning, sir.
So,
very good morning,
sir. Dr. Pragesh Kumar, OSD Bhopal, he has also joined us, and other people are also joining us. So I think we can formally start our introductory session, sir. Okay. So just this off this screen sharing, whoever has done that. Screen share किसने? Okay, Okay, so good morning and welcome to all of you for this virtual event. I am Dr. Madan Dhanora, Assistant Professor of Economics at Government Mahavir College, Petlawad, Madhya Pradesh Higher Education Department. I welcome Honorable Sri Chandrasekhar Walimbe sir. He is like today's guest of honor. He is Additional Commissioner at Higher Education Department of Madhya Pradesh. Dr. Pragesh Agrawal, Officer on Special Duty, RUSA, Madhya Pradesh Government. Dr. Suresh T. Silawat, Additional Director, Indore Division, and Dr. Kantu Damor, Principal in Charge, Government Mahavir College, Petlawad. So I welcome all the guests of honor, speakers, special guest, session chair, and participant who are joining us through various platforms like Zoom and YouTube. The theme of the webinar is industry, academia, innovation, and we know that innovation is very important for a particular economy. Innovation is basically engine of economic growth and development. It is a cornerstone for sustained economic growth and prosperity. It brings creative and continuous development. The basic agenda of this particular webinar is like, how we can go for industry, academia, interaction in country like India, how we can formulate appropriate theory which are suitable for industry, academia collaboration in country like India. And especially like we are informal economy is there, there is high possibility of gross root innovation at local level. So we will also look for very interesting topics through this webinar. And we can very proudly say that like, more than 850 participants across the world has registered for this particular event. We have invited speakers and session chair from top class international and national universities like American University, Xinjiang University, University of Cambridge, IIT, NIT, IISc Bangalore, and we have also speakers from industry like Maruti Suzuki. So I hope that this particular event will be very productive and fruitful for us, for higher education department. So with this word, I would like to invite our principal in charge, Dr. Kantu Damar, for formal welcome of our guest of honor and special guest. Sir, please.
Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Industry Academic Innovation in collaborations with MP Higher Education Quality Improvement Program, World Bank, organized by IQAS, Government Mahavir College, Petlawad. Before beginning this webinar, I would like to introduction in guest of honor, Mr. Chandrasekhar Walimbe, Additional Commissioner, Higher Education, MP. Special guest, Dr. Pragesh Kumar Agrawal, OSD, RUSA State Project Director of Higher Education. Professor Usha K. Nair, OSD, World Bank Project Director of Higher Education. And all speaker, I would like welcome all the participant and student. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your kind words of appreciation. So today we have our guest of honor, Chandrasekhar Walimbe sir, and this is matter of pride for us that he joined us and he has shared his time with us because he is extremely busy, extremely engaged in lot of activities at the higher education department. So I will, I want to introduce sir. Sir has obtained his BTech in Computer Science Engineering from IIT Kharagpur. And he was the first batch student of computer science engineering from IIT Kharagpur. He has long experience of working in administration. Before joining administrative services, he was in corporate in the IT industry, and he is expert in the area of IT, e-governance, and process engineering area. So on this special occasion, I would like to invite Sri Chandrasekhar Walimbe, Additional Commissioner Higher Education Department, to share his thought in the spirit of the event. Please welcome, sir. Hello, sir. Sir, Walim? Yes.
Yeah, he's there. He's there.
Yeah. Very good morning to all. Actually, Dr. Pragesh Agrawal, sir, Dr. Usha Madam, Dr. Sulesh Labat, sir, Dr. Dam, sir, our principal in charge, Dr. Madan, sir, and other respected dignitaries present in today's webinar. The topic which have been chosen for today's webinar, when it was first suggested to me by Mrs. Nair, then without any thought, I agreed to participate in it because this topic is very, very dear to me. During my college days, when I was in IIT Kharagpur, at that time, this innovation and industry partnership was something which was built in the institution. We had one alumni, Dr. Lord Kumar Bhattacharya ji. He was an IITian of 1950 batch, and he did his mechanical engineering from our institution, and then he set up an industry in Great Britain, and he formed a company, WMG, Warwick Mechanical Group, and that group used to come to our institution and invite some of our batchmates for apprenticeship there. And that way, we used to get a feeling of how the industry works. And then when we came back to again our institution, we used to discuss these ideas. So that was how the industry and academic collaboration something just settled down in my mind, that why it is so important for an education institution to be involved in collaboration with industry. Similarly, I would like to share an experience. When I was in Seoul, South Korea, there I had the opportunity to visit the Samsung company head office. The Samsung, it was a very small trade merchant in 1930s, but gradually, due to liberal policy of government, it expanded. The South Korean economy was as bad as our country in 1950s. It was a war-ravaged economy, mainly agrarian economy. But due to support from government, it slowly and gradually built up its economic base. And the Samsung, which was a trader, it started building its base in electronics, then it went in automobile, then in oil sector, and now it has become one of the world's biggest company. The Samsung had also set up its digital academy in IITs, and that digital academy used to train our students on artificial intelligence, on VLSI chips, on various robotics issues, and so on and so forth. So these two examples I just wanted to bring in knowledge, just to highlight the point that it is something very much ingrained, the association and seamless integration of academics into industry and the industry into academics is very much inbuilt in the system. We know the big CEOs of various corporations like Google, like Tata, like our Infosys, they are they are all from IITs and various other technical institutions. So when they go and they rise to the high position in companies and industries, so that shows that there is something, it is very much informal code, but they somehow industry welcome and absorb the bright brain of academics. So it is very necessary to decipher this code because it is not very well written. So we have to decipher what is the code behind this close collaboration between academia and industry. Academics, as we all know, is the fountain of creativity. The young students, young brain, which come with its own ideas and very creative ideas. And when it meet the experience and wisdom held by our faculty, then certainly something new happens, and that togetherness can tackle any problem faced to it, as well as can can suggest any solution which we require. And the industry is forever in search of innovation, because without innovation nobody can progress. The Stone Age did not perish because there were less of stones. It perished because it did not innovate. Innovation is the foundation, and academia and industry. Academia and industry are two strong pillars of our society. And it is the innovation which is the child of these two giants' collaboration. So innovation, what it requires three things. The first is it requires the brainstorming, which we all higher education institution are proud of, and we hold that within us. Then from the industry side, it requires the crystallization and codification of the society's problem. Since the industry is on the applied side of science, so they know it very well, what is the problem that society is facing and what is the solution the society is looking for. So that industry can very well articulate, as well as industry can also fund the necessary research and development. And third thing is necessary framework for to be mutually beneficial. So that framework is provided by the government, and that framework is something which create the necessary atmosphere for collaboration, as exemplified in the great rise of our Asian countries. So that is something our government is already doing it at a very high pace. But somehow our institutions are not able to rise to that occasion, and not all the institutions, only a few institutions are able to utilize the opportunity which have been thrown by the challenges. So we have to think and we have to mediate a lot. What are the stumbling blocks that our education institutions are facing in utilizing the necessary opportunity? We all know that education institution in India are one of the best in the world. We are among the top 10 countries of the world when it comes to the issue of higher education. But when it comes to the issue of innovation, we are somehow lagging and we do not stand to that level as the other countries are. Innovation index of ours are not to that high level. There may be multiple reasons. There's a lack of trust, the readiness, the time-oriented delivery, the financial constraint, the inadequate technology readiness level. There may be many issues. The trained manpower, incentive necessary for the research and development. So these are some of the issues that are creating hindrance in necessary collaboration. But these definitely tackled. We can make the mandatory of industry representative in the advisory committee of the college. We can allow the mobility of faculty and students. We can make college where education institutions on a regular basis. So these steps can definitely go a long way in increasing the confidence and creating a platform where both can interact and both can each other. We have to think innovatively for increasing the collaboration between the institution in our state and industry. There are some township and there are some industrial hubs within the state, and that industrial hub should cater to the institution which are in the vicinity, and they should make it a very sound practice to be in regular contact with these institutions, and the necessary framework what is required should be suggested so that the government can accordingly change the policies to make the industry in academic collaboration that much important. The South Korea, as we know today, are having so many, more than 200 industrial satellite townships, and each industrial satellite township is associated with a number of educational institutions. The Samsung itself has the collaboration with more than top 10 of the world university, and with each university it has a number of memorandum of association. As much as with Stanford University, it has more than 200 article of association. So that is the kind of level we should cherish for with the industrial township and industrial hubs. We should enter into a dialogue to how can we add in solution of their problems. This topic today chosen is very relevant, and it has become the need of the hour to discuss on it. I congratulate the organizers of this webinar for having chosen such a brilliant topic and bringing it in the cognizance of all other institutions. I extend my warm wishes that this webinar would be a great uh, success and would go a long way in establishing the necessary atmosphere, which is so much necessary for our higher education institution as well as industry. Thank you, Dr. Madan, for inviting me. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, sir, for your kind words of appreciation. Thank you so much for giving us your valuable time. And yes, sir, you highlighted many key point which are regarding innovation and industry academia innovation. You have also shared your experience of your college as well as of administrative services. Uh, Sir, we are working, for example, in India, many good scholars are there, and many of them are also joining us in this webinar. Uh, in the future, of course, to increase the innovation capacity of our state, our higher education department, we can go for formal collaboration with many of the institutions. We have renowned scholar Professor Walter Park from American University. When we talk about intellectual property IPR index, so he was first person who has actually invented IPR index in his 1997 paper that was published in Research Policy. So in this webinar, yes, of course, we are looking for the actual impact on the innovation capacity of both academics and industry. So again, thank you so much, sir. And yes, I can guarantee that in the future, under your support and guidance, we will do best both for academic as well as research in the Higher Education Institute of Government of Madhya Pradesh. So, sir, thank you so much. Now, I would like to invite our special guest, Dr. Pragesh Agrawal. He is currently holding the position of Officer on Special Duty, RUSA at Madhya Pradesh Higher Education Government. He is one of the extraordinary professor. He is expert of NEC. He worked in many colleges of Madhya Pradesh government which are accredited with A plus and A plus plus ranking. So, sir, welcome. Welcome, Pragesh, sir. I think we want to listen you also.
Thank you, Dr. Madan, for inviting me in this particular seminar. So, first of all, I would like to wish a very good morning to respected Valimbe sir, Additional Commissioner, Department of Higher Education. My best regards to Professor Suresh Silawat sir, who is the Additional Director of Indore region. Very good morning to the Honorable Principal sir. A very special good morning to Professor Walter Park. And I wish very good morning to all the participants who are joining across the country and from from other countries abroad. Very good morning to one and all present in this webinar. Our respected Additional Commissioner sir has already given the best piece of advices, and that's why I don't find there is lot much left for now for me to speak on it. But as I have been invited in this particular webinar, I would like to very especially congratulate Petlawat College for holding this Industry Academia Association webinar, because I feel that industry and academia, they are inseparable. They walk hand in hand. And Madhya Pradesh government especially is looking forward to develop many incubation centers where we can generate new innovations, new ideas. We can go for new patents. And with the help of the experts who are joining this particular webinar, like Professor Walter Park, and I'm seeing there are participants and speakers from Jaipur University, and I may not be knowing each one of you who are present in this webinar, but I can really feel the zeal with which the Government College Petlawat is going ahead with this Industry and Academia Association. Madhya Pradesh government typically is looking forward for self-reliance, which is called Atmanirbharta, and I'm pretty sure this particular seminar is going to prove to be a milestone in that particular journey. So I wish all of you all the best. I wish Dr. Madan Dhanora all the best and I'm thankful to him personally for inviting me in this particular webinar. And I request the college authorities to please keep the advices of additional commissioner sir in mind, and please never ever give up. Please keep on moving on the path of innovation and path of technical development. So thank you very much for inviting me, and I wish you all the best for this particular webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. Your words are always energetic for us. Actually, I got opportunity to listen you to meet you personally also at the Bhopal. Yes, we are doing our best, and we will try to do our best. We are young professors because in 2019 many of us joined the services. We will try to build a very healthy environment in higher education department, and in future also we will look for your guidance, support, suggestions, because our college is also going for next first cycle. So yes, like in the very soon we will also organize special lectures under your guidance. So thank you so much, sir. Here we conclude our introductory session. Thank you so much, our guest of honor, Sri Chandrasekhar Walimbe sir, Pragyesh sir, Dr. Suresh T. Silawat sir, our lead college principal Anijwal sir. Thank you so much for giving your time, because I know that yesterday also I got opportunity to interact with Pragyesh Agrawal sir, and he said that on the Sunday also they are sitting in the Vallabh Bhavan of Madhya Pradesh government and doing their duties at late night. So yes, we encourage sir, we encourage you in terms of your continuous interaction with our college authority. So with this word, thank you so much. Now we will move for our regular presentations. Today we have 3 presentation. One is by Walter Park, Dr. Ruchi Sharma, and Dr. Sheikh Fayaz. And to chair the session, we have invited we have brilliant professors with us. We have professors like Lakhvinder sir, the face is known for everyone. We have KJ Joseph sir with us. So now we will go for our first presentation by Professor Walter G. Park, and this session will be chaired by Professor Lakhvinder sir. I think Lakhvinder sir will chair all the session because the Professor KJ Joseph was agreed to chair 2 of the today's session, but there was he has one immediate meeting with minister in Kerala government. So I think he has already discussed with Professor Lakhvinder sir regarding chairing of the session. Professor Park, I think he joined us. Professor Park is currently associated as a professor at American University, Washington. His area of research is IPR, R&D, patenting, and he is one of the very popular professor in the area of innovation economics. He is graduate from University of Toronto, MPhil from Oxford University, and PhD from Yale University. He has publication in the all international top class journals. He is also serving as in the advisory board of the journal Research Policy. And already when we were interacting with our additional commissioner sir, I said that his path breaking work, which was published in 1997, that was determinants of patent right as cross country analysis, where he has prepared IPR index for many countries, and that index is still popular among all policymaker and researcher, and formally known as Ginerte and Park Index. So thank you so much, sir, for our invitation. And to chair this session, Professor Lakhvinder sir from Department of Economics, Punjabi University is with us. Sir is also founding editor of the journal Millennial Asia, which is right now very extremely good international journal in the area of innovation economics. Sir was also authored many books agriculture, innovation system, and inclusive rural development, which was published by Oxford University Press. he has also publication in many good journal. His recent book, Agriculture Innovation System in Asia Towards Inclusive and Rural Development, published by Routledge, is also very popular. He has also hold on agriculture economics, industry, and institutional economics. So now I would like to hand over this session to Dr. Professor Lakhvinder sir. Sir, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Madan. I hope you are, I'm audible.
Yeah, sir, you are audible.
So thank you very much, Dr. Madan, giving me an opportunity to participate in this very important conference which you have been organizing. Good morning to everyone who is participating, and especially I welcome Professor Walter G. Park for today's presentation. I would like to reveal at the very beginning that he has been did his PhD degree from Yale University, and I am also alumnus of the same department. So it's nice to interact with this very famous professor. Especially, I have learned from his biodata that he has been associated with many of my friends like Professor Kunli. They have worked jointly, and I have been for a long period of time visiting the Seoul National University and associated with Professor Kunli, and he is regularly visiting us. I don't know why I have not been interacted earlier with Professor Walter. So hopefully in future we will get a lot of opportunities. That the kind of issue which Professor Walter has proposed to talk about is creative work. And I think that the humanity at large and the evolution of humanity has been shaped by the creative work, and the way we have been developed over a long period of time. Perhaps the role of creative work has always remained in the forefront to lead us towards the direction in which we have been moving. There are a lot of challenges during this processes which the whole world is facing. I hope that the creative work of the human beings is going to again meet those challenges as historically we were able to succeed. I think that instead of I'm speaking, I would like to invite Professor G. Walter to speak 30 to 35 minutes. And after that, we will have a discussion over this very important issue which Professor Walter is going to develop upon. So I welcome and invite Professor Walter to please make a presentation.
Well, thank you very much kindly for your introduction. I also wish I had met you earlier, but nonetheless, better late than never. And also I want to thank all the organizers, Dr. Madan Donora for organizing this, for inviting me, all the sponsors. It's good to see old friends and colleagues here, as well as making new friends and colleagues as well. So my talk is has a bit of an economics flavor, and I was hoping to share my screen. Could the host allow me to show my PowerPoint slides?
Yes, sir. Please share. Share
it. Okay. It still says disabled participant screen sharing. So maybe I have to be temporarily the co-host.
Danish, make sir as a co-host. Yeah, sir,
please, please.
Okay, great. There you go. Okay, I hope you can see my slides.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so yes, so the purpose of my talk is to discuss creative works, copyright systems, and basically summarize the research that I've done with my co-author, Professor Olena Ivas of Queen's University in Canada. So this area is really understudied. When people talk about innovation and invention, or productivity growth. When people talk about productivity and innovation, they're usually thinking about manufacturing industries, right? Like chemicals, pharmaceuticals, electronics, machinery. Rarely do they think of creative works. And so this is why my motivation. And so, so there are three reasons why I believe that creative works can affect innovation. So for example, three reasons. First is knowledge. Knowledge you can find in obvious places like books, but also poetry, music, paintings, sculptures, films. And also this is where academia come in, because academia, we do a lot of writing of books, journals, and produce films and be inspirations for films as well as music. And you know, when I look at the work of early civilization by archaeologists and anthropologists, they often look at paintings and sculptures done by, you know, human beings from thousands of years ago. So clearly artworks are a store of knowledge, okay? But in the more modern world, knowledge is stored in complicated articles such as journal articles, databases, software, and these are actually inputs into scientific research, right? Nobody can do R&D without journals and databases, software. Those first two are obvious. A third way in which creative works also affect innovation is because they have a interdependence with certain industries. I call them complementary industries. So for example, there are industries that exist to help enhance creative works, right? For example, sound systems, 3D video, Bluetooth, computers, TV, mobile devices, all of these are produced by, of course, the manufacturing industry. But my point is that as the creative market grows, this gives innovators in these other industries incentives to invest in technologies that enhance copyrighted or creative works. Moreover, these other industries produce inputs that we use to produce creative works, whether it's broadband, satellites, theater, and other infrastructure, photography equipment, animation tools. So as you can see, there's a lot of interdependence between these complementary industries and the copyright-based industries. And the data show that the copyright and creative industries are omnipresent. WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Office, has done lots of these survey studies about the share of the copyright industry in GDP. Of course, there's no causal connection. That when you look at when they say, oh, 10% of the economy is copyright, that doesn't mean that copyright industries produce 10% of GDP, but nonetheless, it's a good way of gauging how important copyright is. And moreover, perhaps you don't know this, but when I looked at the licensing data of US companies, I was expecting manufacturing to be number one. No, it's not number one. Copyright-based industries are number one in terms of international licensing. So if you include audiovisual, software, and books, films, it's like the copyright industry accounts for 46% of American licensing abroad, and the manufacturing sector about 38%. Okay, so that shows you an idea of their importance. So I don't want to go too much into the literature. I'll just complain that there's really very, very little work done on copyright. Most of the work has been done on patents. The few studies either look at one country or they look at one product like a book or a film, but never collectively. And studies on piracy are kind of off the point. They often think that piracy is the inverse of copyright protection, but I find that a limiting perspective. I think that piracy can be serious, but at the same time, people seem to confuse piracy and copyright flexibilities. Like fair use and fair dealing, they're not necessarily equivalent to piracy. You can always loosen copyright systems to encourage more diffusion of knowledge and fair use, but that's not the same as piracy. So I think a lot of the literature has gone awry on that. But the usual prior theory is that just like patents and like other trademarks and other intellectual property, copyrights work by basically discouraging either piracy or imitation copying. But at the same time, let's not forget that copyright also raises the cost of doing research, raising through royalty fees and so forth. Okay, so my ultimate goal, or our ultimate goal, is to contribute to the literature on economic development, how intellectual property spurs industrial and economic development. But that's the larger question. My more modest goal is, the first step is to show how copyrights affect technology transfer. And then later, step 2, step 3 will be to study how the creative technologies transferred can stimulate productivity growth. Okay, and the other more immediate goal is to demonstrate what I argued earlier. I argued earlier that it's very narrow to think of copyright protection only affecting creative works. Copyright protection can also spill over and affect those complementary industries, those industries that enhance the quality of copyrighted works or produce inputs into producing copyright creative works. Okay, so what's novel about our study is that it is firm level, detailed US multinational firms. We control for industry variation in the sensitivity to copyrights. Not all industries are the same, just like in the study of patents, we know that pharmaceuticals are more sensitive than transportation and so forth. So similarly, that's the case in copyrights. We also account for the fact that there could be some selection bias. If you only study copyright protection on firms that are practicing the production of creative works and licensing, you're ignoring the fact that there are also firms that are not yet in the market, right? So if you look at the data on licensing, there are lots and lots of zeros, and some foreign countries are not even engaged in with American companies, right? So that suggests that there might be some entry costs, and that's why it's important to take into account that copyrights could also affect the extensive margin as well as the intensive margin. And so the argument as to what could affect selection into these markets is the cost of adaptation. It's not easy to enter the market. So we model entry cost as some function of the cost of adapting creative works to a local economy. For example, you have to translate the work. You may have to tweak it so that the work is, fits the local culture, right? Whether it's American movies entering the Indian market or Indian Bollywood movies entering the North American market, there's going to be some need for adaptation, right? Okay, and then later I'll explain why adaptation costs will vary between affiliate and unaffiliated licensing. So I've got a lot of slides ahead and details. So I'll give you the key findings, and then the rest will be just details. So yes, I find that in general, copyrights promote knowledge transfer. So in that sense, it ultimately would be good for economic development because local economies can get access to knowledge that's embodied in creative works. But it's not for all industries. For some industries, copyright could reduce knowledge flows. And And that's because let's think in terms of like an ecosystem. When copyrights are strong, if you're a copyright owner, you might like that because then you get to charge a higher price, you get to sell more exclusively. But don't forget that you also, in an ecosystem, you're also borrowing knowledge from others. So when copyrights are strong, your input prices also go up. And so in that sense, for some companies, flexibility, copyright flexibility is better, not strong copyrights. Okay, so that's the first finding. And the second finding is that, yes, selection is very important. And, you know, ironically, the stronger the copyright protection, that doesn't necessarily, it may not increase unaffiliated licensing. Unaffiliated licensing is important because you want American companies to license to, let's say, Filipino companies, to license to Indian companies, license to Korean companies, license to South African companies. But what I find is that often multinational companies prefer to just license to their affiliates only and not to unaffiliated. And one reason is because of adaptation cost, right? We'll find that copyrights can also increase adaptation costs more so that firms switch from unaffiliated licensing to affiliated. And the third key finding is that our study confirms that there are impacts of copyright reforms beyond the traditional copyright industries. It affects those manufacturing industries that are complementary, like computers, communications, and other industries that produce goods that enhance copyright works. So that's the summary of my findings, that copyrights can have these diverse effects. So the rest is mainly just some details. So next, if I could just provide a little bit of, you know, our theoretical thinking that is underlining our approach, so that just gives some perspective of how we reason. So I won't go too much into details, but if you look at equation 1, this sort of captures what incentivizes technology transfer. So the left-hand side represents profits. Profits equal revenue minus cost. So the price times quantity, revenue minus cost. But then there's also an entry cost, and that's what the letter E stands for. So what I want you to do is focus on the fact that the letter E, entry costs, are a function of two things. One, lambda, which represents kind of the ability to adapt. And sigma represents the strength of copyright protection. So the idea is that if you're a firm that can easily adapt their copyrighted works or creative works to a foreign country, then entry costs fall. On the other hand, I'm arguing that stronger copyrights will actually raise the entry cost. And the reason is that when copyrights are stronger abroad, it's the onus of the owner of the creative work to differentiate itself more, because that's the whole point behind intellectual property, right? The whole point is that if you produce a work that is too similar to the existing, then you are infringing. And when copyrights are not that strong, you can always have a minor change and you can still market the creative work. But when copyrights are very strong, your own work must be sufficiently differentiated. And that raises the entry cost, that raises the entry barrier if copyrights are too strong. So that's the key insight. So so there's two stages here. Okay, so stage one, the firm has to decide, do I want to enter the local economy or not? Do I want to enter Sri Lanka, for example? Yes or no? And if I enter Sri Lanka, I have to adapt my creative work to the Sri Lankan market. Okay, now once I enter, then stage two is to decide how much technology should I transfer, how much FDI should I do, etc. And so let's work backwards. We always work let's because what we do is we look, a firm is going to look at stage 2 and ask itself, how much profit will I earn? And then work backwards and ask if the net profits are worth the entry cost. Are they higher than the entry cost? If not, I'm not going to enter. So in stage 2, in stage 2, copyrights generally work by, because this is a dominant firm competitive fringe market, you have a firm and it's able to exclude copycats if copyrights are strong. So therefore its residual demand curve is very large. It has the market to itself. And so, so copyright should stimulate, the volume of investment through what's called a market expansion effect, because copyrights increase the demand for them. But on the other hand, it also allows the firm to exercise market power because they're very limited competitors, right? Okay, so let's assume that now they make some amount of profits. And as I said, all of these firms vary in terms of their ability to adapt. So let's let land a star here. If you look at the yellow shaded profit function, let's say the land a star represents the point where net profits just equal the entry cost. So that means for firms whose ability to adapt is less than land a star, they're not going to enter the market. For those that have a greater lambda than lambda star, they will enter the market. And so this is the relationship between number of creative works that enter, say, let's say, developing economy like Sri Lanka, and profits. So you can see that the curve is positively sloped, which means the higher the profits, the more works there are. And if there's an increase in ability to adapt, that shifts the curve up. And so you'll have, for every level of profits, you'll have more works transferred. And then now this is the complicated part. This is where intellectual property or copyright protection can have an ambiguous effect. On the one hand, increases profits, so therefore we move along the end curve and there'll be more works transferred. But on the other hand, it increases entry costs. So the net effect is ambiguous. The way I drew the diagram, there's a net increase in number of works, number of licenses, etc. But I could easily have drawn this curve the other way around so that there's actually a fall in works. So it's not that simple. So therefore I have just two hypotheses. One hypothesis that they all depend on the market size, and this is how the various copyright industries will vary in terms of sensitivity. And so the argument is that the greater the market size, the more they'll be sensitive to copyright protection. And the reason should be straightforward. The argument is that pirates tend to like goods and industries where there's a lot of sales. So naturally, firms that have a lot of sales have a greater incentive to protect this. Okay, and so so hypothesis one is that as long as the market size for a copyright owner is large enough, the market expansion effect will outweigh the market power effect. And so we will see more licensing. But it's also possible that, and the evidence, as I said in my summary, shows that for some industries, copyright protection might actually reduce licensing. And then the other hypothesis is that, in stage one, when a firm has to decide whether or not to enter the market, it's also possible that copyright protection might just increase the likelihood of entry through affiliated firms, but not necessarily to unaffiliated. Okay, and so this is the econometric equation I'm looking at. The main thing is what I highlighted. If our hypotheses are true, that these effects depend on the industry sensitivity, then beta 2 has to be positive. We have to, for our theory to hold, beta 2 has to be estimated to be positive. Okay, so The data come from various surveys. They are micro data of US multinational companies. So I won't get into all the details there because they're in the paper. Copyright strength, as Dr. Madan Donora mentioned, comes from a previous paper of mine. And in this case, I collaborated with a PhD student named Reynolds. So copyright strength depends on how long protection is, strength of enforcement, international agreements, and also whether or not the less flexible they are. Of course, stronger doesn't always mean better. Okay, so personally, I like flexible copyrights, but in this case, I'm measuring just the strength. So the less flexible, like less fair use, the stronger the copyright system. Adaptability. Now, how do we measure adaptability? Well, adaptability will be a function of how similar two countries are in terms of their creative works they produce, right? So if there's a lot of overlap, then that means they're very similar. So how do you measure similarity of these creative goods between countries? Well, I would ideally like to have data on output, but I don't. So I use export data. So if you look at F1, F2, FM, these are just the shares of creative goods in their export. So F1 might be music, and music might be 25% of their exports. F2 could be books, 10%, and FM could be software. So an F star is the distribution of creative exports of the foreign country. So basically, we calculate the angle between these two vectors, right? So for example, if F1 equals F1 star, F2 equals F2 star, if all the shares are the same, there's perfect overlap between the US and a foreign country. So there's no angle. The angle is 0. So therefore, cosine of 0 equals 1. If the two countries specialize in different kinds of goods, then F and F star will be orthogonal, 90 degrees. So therefore, the cosine of 90 degrees equals 0. So this adaptability index varies from 0 to 1, depending on how similar the countries are in terms of their creative exports. And this is just a brief overview of the measures that I use. So copyrights have increased in strength on average across the world. It's gotten less skewed, meaning that it used to be very skewed. Most of the countries had very low levels of protection, but because of TRIPS and other WIPO agreements, copyrights around the world have gotten stronger. And most of the reforms occurred in the late 90s and early 2000 periods. Okay, and then this one is just, the second table just shows you the output similarities between the US and other countries. And mostly, of course, the US is similar to the other G6 European countries. A lot of books are similar, but similarity decreases when it comes to TV and music. Okay, so this is the main result here. I'm almost done. The main result is that, as you can see, what I highlighted, copyright protection does have a positive effect, but when you focus on the selection, Heckman's selection bias, you clearly see what I argued earlier, that you have a positive sign for affiliate licensing, more likely to enter by transferring knowledge to your affiliate, and not as likely to transfer to an unaffiliate. And then once you do transfer, the stronger the copyright protection. If your industry has a lot of large market size, then copyright protection will stimulate licensing. Otherwise, firms will practice their market power and transfer less technology. Okay, so this shows you that it's not, simple that copyrights are always going to be stronger. Copyright will always be promoting knowledge transfer, only in cases where industries are sufficiently large. Okay, so that was the main result, and then the rest of the paper does a lot of robustness checks and find that the result continues to hold. And finally, just wanted to show you that there is this interdependence between copyright industries and these complementary industries. How do we define a complementary industry? Well, this table shows you that complementary industries are those industries where the copyright sector is one of their top 10 industries of sale. So in other words, computers and audiovisual equipment, semiconductors, navigation, these industries also sell goods that to other like copyright or creative industries. In some of them, their top industry of sale is the copyright industry. So this is how we formally define complementary industries. If an industry doesn't sell anything to copyright-based industries, then they're not included. So this is our way of saying these industries have a vested interest in seeing strong copyright reforms because their market depends on copyright. Okay, so if you're a TV producer, you make TV sets. That's very electronic and technical, but the more programming that is protected and content that is protected by copyright, the bigger the market for programs. And therefore, I have an incentive to manufacture more TV sets and make more innovations. Okay, and then this next chart just shows you that there's a lot of interdependence between copyright and complementary industries. Parent companies don't just have affiliates in the copyright industries. They also own some affiliates in the complementary industries. So for example, again, a TV company like Sony may not only acquire other TV companies in the US, but also some creative, also like music. So Sony is one of those companies that are pretty much everywhere, and other Korean companies like Samsung also pretty much everywhere. So this shows you that when copyright reforms take place, a lot of these parents purchase or acquire affiliates in other industries. Okay, and then this last regression table just confirms that again. I only highlight the main results. Just showing that copyright reforms all have positive effects on these complementary industries' incentive to innovate and invest, as long as they have a sufficient market. If their markets are too small, then no. Basically, for them, copyright reforms will increase the cost of doing innovation so that they'll do less investing. But for, the paper shows you what the critical value is, and I didn't present it here. But so for some industries, like especially communications and computers, copyrights give them an incentive to create apps and so forth for that. Okay, so this last chart just summarizes, basically, again, to recap, copyrighted works are now pretty much omnipresent, and they're really heavily a part of international technology transfer through licensing. And so you generally find positive effects, but not always. It depends on the market sizes. And most importantly, I think that this study shows you that it's really narrow only to think about creative industries. We have to realize that creative industries also spur industrial development in other industries like electronics, computers, communication. So there's a lot of interdependence. And this is where, exactly there is academia and innovation industry have collaborations through creative works. And just because you're focusing on creative works doesn't mean that there couldn't be some spillovers to, the manufacturing industries. So the main limitation of my paper or my study is that I've only focused on copyright strength, but I would really like to, in a sequel to my research, look at fair use and fair dealing, some of these limitations and exceptions. I think that they also could potentially spur new industries. Okay, so with that, I'll unshare my screen, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Oh, yes. Thank you very much for a very stimulating, presentation. I hope there are a large number of questions which might have accumulated by the participants. Before I allow this presentation to be open up, I must congratulate Professor Walter for giving very exciting presentation on the copyright copyrights, which is mostly the creative work is being protected by copyrights across everywhere in the world. But there are a huge amount of differentials existing in terms of the implementation of the copyright rights. And I think that the one of the very important aspect which one has to look into very seriously is that as this intellectual property rights are relatively strongly implemented and homogenized across the countries, especially after formation of World Trade Organization, and bringing in the intellectual property rights under the surveillance of the World Trade Organization, and asking various countries of the world to similarly implement the kind of standard uh, intellectual property rights which was prescribed by various developed countries of the world. Now there are two scenarios which comes to my mind. One is that prior to WTO formation, it was inter-country, relations in terms of protection of property rights. But largely, you will find that loose intellectual property rights were available for the less developed countries. In the post-WTO scenario, largely these intellectual property rights are relatively enforced very strongly. So do you think that the firms which are operating and licensing more to the less developed country, as your data is showing, how much transfer of resources has occurred in terms of strictly implementing property rights from less developed countries to developed countries? You have argued that profits are positively correlated, but the realization of profits is one, and when licenses are being given, then you'll find that the fees are being charged. So I think that amount of money, how less developed countries have able to pay more relatively, or have benefited anyway, as compared to the earlier times when even developed countries in the historical past have not faced such kind of scenario in terms of very loose property rights, and firms are able to develop at a faster rate while less paying the fee charges and other hindrances compared to what now. And then find that largely the debate which talks about that China has remained under the list of the WTO as well as United States of America for surveillance in terms of not holding the property rights, and they do pirate a lot of products which they have benefited a lot in terms of building their industrialization, not adhering to that. So do you subscribe that the kind of intellectual property rights which are being enforced presently are going to benefit to the firms from the developing countries, or mainly the firms which are from the developed country, they are going to gain out of it? So these are my questions. The second very important aspect is that do you think that the value chains in which the less developed firms enter through the licensing processes, are they going to remain dependent, or they can as you talk about complementarity, so are they are going to maintain this complementarity for a long period of time, or they can turn out to be autonomous, independent, and also able to develop value chains independently, as has been done by the firms of the developed countries? With these words, I express my gratitude, and I have learned a lot from the very theoretically sound, empirically very intensive exercise has been done by Professor Walter and presented. And I hope all the participants are expected to learn a lot out of this kind of very rigorous exercise of theory as well as practice through empirical estimates, and have a large implications for public policy, both internationally as well as domestically. So I open now this house for discussion, and I invite some kind of questions if there are. So now you can ask questions. You can raise hands and ask questions. Yes, I think Ruchi would like to ask a question. Dr. Ruchi Sharma, you can ask a question.
Yes, good morning to you, sir. A very good morning, good evening to Professor Park. As you said, it's a very, very stimulating, talk. And whenever I listen to Professor Park, whenever I see his papers, it really amazes me how he, manages to quantify a very difficult kind of a question, which we'll be thinking how, we'll get data on this issues, how we will, formalize them, and then how we will, which empirical strategy we'll follow. But when you listen to his talks and read his papers, it seems so easy, and I yes, this is the way, these things could have been gone. So I have just a couple of clarificatory queries. Like, for instance, when sir said that, you have this copyright-based industries contribute more to the GDP as compared to the patent-based industry. So are there any overlaps between these two sets of industries? So, because you're also talking about the complementary, industries, and when I look at those list of the complementary industries, these are a mix of a service-based and manufacturing sector, and both of these are, as we expect, is going to have very different, asset structure as well as the cost structures. So then, how do we, understand that the technology transfer terms are also going to be very similar across this, and how do we deal with the differences when we are putting this kind of very different type of companies together? For example, when you talk about Sony, its manufacturing unit would have very different kind of a cost and asset structure. When we look at Sony, let us say the entertainment channels, that is going to have a very different kind of a context. So this was my questions. I think I really look forward to your answer, and as it's really, really, I think a very wonderful morning we had here, and very stimulating. Thank you so much, sir.
So now it is over to Professor Walter to kindly, respond to the questions.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very kindly for your both your feedbacks. Let me. I think that for the research, the complicated question you just posed, Dr. Sharma, might not, I think alter my result too much. But your point is well taken. It's not that simple. But in terms of the data collection, they're both distinct. So the firms don't overlap, and most firms usually respond by just. Most firms, as you know, are multi-products. They tend to do more than one industry, and it complicates things. But most of us researchers, we just like to just label their primary industry that they mentioned. But companies like Samsung, Sony, they are in multiple NAICS codes. They're in multiple SIC codes. So, I did worry a little bit about the overlap, because the copyright industries, if you look at them, they include telecommunications. And you would think, oh, isn't that equipment? No, it's cable, like cable TV, cable programming and distribution. So in that sense, it's got, and it does most of the R&D in the copyright industries. So it's kind of odd that we mix, music and film, books along with these cable, but the complementary industries that I looked at, they are a different category. So the telecommunications are not in there. The communication companies are actually making, manufacturing infrastructure and so forth. So that said, what you said, it's true that there's so much overlap that even if they are in distinct sectors for purposes of data recording, it's basically, you know, if you think of a company like, I'm thinking of a company like, I'll think of it, but basically you have upstairs there's one R&D and then downstairs there's a different R&D, and they could easily talk to each other. So, you know, so maybe in that sense, that's why I don't think my results are too much affected by your criticism, because when the upstairs division thinks of sees copyright protection is protecting their market, then the downstairs R&D people say, oh, okay, in that case, I'll make better chips for you. And so I think that's okay. Now, if I can also address Professor Lakwinder Singh Gill's comment about whom I think will, copyright protection will mostly benefit, I agree that the way I've phrased it, mostly the American companies. My research, I would like to, you know, possibly link, you know, other data sets so that I could have firms in India or firms in Korea and firms in Japan and just look at how copyright transfers affected them. But so far, my database doesn't really identify these unaffiliated parties. So I really can't tell, but I can just get this sense from all these American companies that basically they want to shut down piracy. They want to charge as much fees as they want. And so that's why also I looked at also the quantity in terms of R&D and number of FDI. So you're right, copyright strength basically allows American companies to charge a higher fee. But no new transactions, no new licenses, no new agreements, no new deals. But the other data that I look at seems to suggest that there is still a quantity effect. Now, does the knowledge transfer enable the indigenous company to then grow up and compete equally with these American companies? That I don't know, but I can easily imagine a strategic point where the American licensor will only license up to a point, not up to a point where you'll take over my territory, right? So in that sense, I think copyright protection. I mean, I'll just say that in terms of what American companies do, I don't think that it's going to fully benefit like companies in the developing world. But I think your other question was, do I still think that copyright protection will favor the developing world? I'll just tentatively say perhaps, because when you look at patents, the Chinese know how to exploit patents too. And maybe 20 years ago, before the WTO, we worried that you know, European and American large companies will dominate, but now they're also getting into the patenting business. And India is also one of the top 10 countries filing patents in the United States. So now Indians also know how to play the game. And so, and as I said, my ecosystem argument was that, and this is what I always warn American companies, be careful what you wish for. You know, you want the Philippines, you want China, you want Togo, you want these countries to strengthen their IP, but that also means that you also have to protect their IP too. If you go into Togo and you use traditional knowledge and you use their resources, expect also to respect their IP as well. Don't just expect them to respect your IP. And so in that sense, perhaps, you know, I don't think strong is always better, but I think that you know, various countries, whether it's Mexico or Korea or India, Indonesia, can design patents and copyrights that are good for them. You know, I think the WTO only just set minimum standards, and of course, maybe the minimum standards are way too high for their stage, but they can adapt or choose their system so that they benefit their native firms as well.
Thank you very much for your clarificatory answers to the questions. I think that all the participants have benefited, and time we have exceeded nearly 10 minutes. So I would like to quickly shift with stating thank you very much, Dr. Walter, for making a wonderful presentation. I look forward to have a long-term relationship with you, and I will communicate with you. Thank you very much. And now I would like to invite Dr. Sheikh Fayaz. I think he's online to make a presentation on development from below and digital innovations, exploring frugal secondary innovations from China and India. So a young man, a very bright young man who is exploding with ideas and very actively participating in various international programs and also organizing such programs. I'm very happy with his performance, and I hope that we will have an exciting presentation to listen. Now I request Dr. Sheikh Fayaz to kindly make a presentation between 25-30 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lakwinder. You are always a source of inspiration. Thank you, Professor Ruchi Sharma, Professor Madan, Professor Walter, and other participants. It's indeed an honor to be with you all. Well, first, I think I had to upload my presentation so that you'll be able to see, because I have kept some pictures. It will be good to have more pictures during the presentations. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, basically I have the title of my presentation, as you can see, is Regional Development and Digital Innovations. I try to blend frugal innovation with basically secondary innovations. Secondary innovation is a very nascent theoretical framework proposed by Professor Xiaobo Wu. I work with Professor Xiaobo Wu at Zhejiang University, China. I was basically interested to see, the rise of China as a innovation economy. And then we tried to, because my training was in grassroots innovation and frugal innovation, so I tried to blend these two, like frugality and secondary innovation, and how these both, frameworks could be used, and how firms are actually exploiting frugality and learning from pioneers. That was the research agenda, and how these two basically lift people out of poverty. And I picked 4 cases from India and China. So I have kept a lot of pictures for you, but I'll go to the background first. We know we are being battling with pandemic COVID-19. All traditional growth models are crumbling. People have talked about alternative innovation models, because we see countries are still struggling with COVID-19. And then we have another climate crisis, wealth inequality, and then the disparity which exists across countries. So there has been various, proposals and explanations put across to understand this diversity, this disparity which exists between some rich countries and the poor countries. And there have been, a lot of explanation proposed to end this disparity and create an inclusive and equal world. For example, if you look at the explanations which have been proposed to understand this unequal world and the disparity which exists between the rich and the poor, between the developing and the developing developed north. For example, we have this cultural explanation proposed by Professor Max Weber. Most of us have are read, are have read all these books in detail. And then we have, for example, Professor David Landis and Max Weber. They talk about culture, that is basically culture which somehow leads to, this disparity which we witness today. And then we have many other explanations. For example, recently Professor James, Professor Robinson, Professor A. Smuglo, they talk about institutional explanation. And then we have Professor Diamond, he talks about geographical advantages and disadvantages, which actually leads to this disparity which we see right now in the world. And then finally, we have some more explanations which have been, proposed using innovation as a lens. For example, very recently, Professor Christensen, he in his book Prosperity Paradox, he tells us that it's basically the market-creating innovation which actually leads this kind of disparity. Countries which have nurtured these market-creating innovations, they were able to have more prosperity and development. And countries where we don't find these market-creating innovation perhaps leads to, this kind of the kind of poverty which is witnessed today. And then we also have seen the role which is played by innovations and technological change. But then there's a question like, if how can countries catch up with each other? Like, what kind of models are there which a country like, for example, India, or a state like Kashmir, I come from Kashmir, so or maybe the African countries, how can they catch up with the most technologically advanced countries, and how can they have this technological development within their spaces? Of course, we have many models of innovations. For example, we have Model 1, which actually started in England with original innovation. For example, the introduction of railways, jams, head grooves, spinning wheels, and then we have the improvements in steam power. So all these radical new to the world innovations and inventions, they emerged from England. And then we have Model 2 innovations where, for example, America, France, Germany, they started learning from England industrial revolution technologies. And this learning was, dominated by adaptations, incremental innovations, and imitations, and mostly driven by, innovation continuities, which we have read, and most of us, they've worked a lot in these areas. And when it comes to Model 2 innovation, since I come from Kashmir, of course, India, and we have seen these developing countries that are struggling with, adaptations of new technologies. Now, when it comes to Model 2 innovation, for example, I'll give you a case of China. In 1980, the GDP per capita of Sri Lanka, India, and Pakistan, it was better than that of China. And most of the developing countries, they were doing exceptionally better than China, given the population and the size and the other institutional factors which were favoring China. But despite that, many other countries, they were performing better than China. But after 1980s, once they they opened their market for the world, and then there was complete radical transformation. And that radical transformation, which lifted almost 1 billion people out of poverty, was perhaps, according to Professor Shia Babu and other innovation scholars from China, was mainly because of this Model 2 innovation trajectory. They were able to, learn from the incumbent technologies. They were able to copy the technologies properly, and using this secondary innovation route, they were able to actually leapfrog in many new areas. Now, this Model 2, innovation culture could be created using following pathways. For example, we have catching up theory proposed by Amsden, Professor Lee, Professor Kim, and they talk about, certain dittos that a firm as a particular, firm which is concentrated in a particular geographical location in a space, they can take dittos, they can skip certain stages, and then they can discover many windows of opportunities. And Professor Lee, in his recent book, the book was reviewed by Professor Lakhwinder Singh a few weeks back, and the excellent review that appeared in EPW India, is one of the leading journal. Professor Lee and Professor Lakhwin, that they also talked about these windows of opportunities, like how a firm can, by taking detours, by skipping certain stages, can discover windows of opportunities. And these windows of opportunities, according to Professor Lee, could not only be always profit driven, they can also be, probably social innovations, where people take the central stage, where people replace profits. And then the other pathway which countries can adopt, for nurturing innovations, for going for development, that could be, the other path could be secondary innovation. As I pointed out, secondary innovation is a very nascent theoretical framework which is proposed by Professor Sherpa Wu. He has studied the emergence of Huawei in China. He has studied Taobao, Alibaba. And then Professor Wu tells us that, countries and small firms, they can learn from original innovations. Original innovation can actually offer springboard platform for new firms, for new entrants, and using these these incumbents technology as a springboard, they can leapfrog to new areas. He has used these breakthroughs in backwardness or is possible using this particular framework. And once the firm learns technology from the incumbent, mostly from foreign technology, then they can enter according to, as similar to what Professor Lee tells us, they can explore windows of opportunity. And then this post-secondary innovation, it could be either, driven by frugal innovation, or it could be driven by, conspicuous innovations, which is targeted for elite customers precisely. And then we have other models of, creating innovation culture, creating development led by innovations. The other frameworks are free innovations, for example, theory proposed by Professor von Hippel, when he talks about democratizing innovations, where profits replace people, sustainability becomes the central stage of the whole innovation process, and then inclusion is again a priority. And precisely he talks about innovation where compensated transactions, it's different from Schumpeterian innovations, mostly seen in grassroots innovations, where market is not the ultimate destination for innovation journey, but serving a local community, solving a problem becomes a priority. And this culture we have seen, emerging from different parts of the world during COVID-19, which I'll briefly talk about once we advance in our presentation. And then we have X innovation and appropriate technology, which is proposed by Professor Gordon. Unfortunately, Professor Gordon, he has authored a couple of books, Models of Innovation, which was published by MIT, and then Alternative Theories of Innovation. I was part of his book project, and he unfortunately died due to a devastating cancer last week. May his soul rest in peace. So that innovation theory was proposed by him, and then he talks about alternative innovations which are different from Schumpeterian innovation, that firms can actually learn from people's knowledge, and they can benefit from both proposed and prescriptive form of knowledge, and this blend of different forms of knowledge can lead to virtuous cycle of prosperity. And then we have seen appropriate technology is somehow similar to what Professor Gordon tells us. But then, we know that innovation leads to growth, innovation leads to development. This is now somehow accepted, since the work of Professor Schumpeter, and then there are a lot of schools, they have acknowledged the important role which innovations play for creating development and for creating an equal or unequal world. But then there was a warning, which was given to us by many scholars. For example, Professor Muzakato, when she published, Rethinking Capitalism in 2013, they talked about that, probably the given models of innovations which we have created so far, they unfortunately lead to unemployment, inequality, climate change crisis is precisely because of the models in which we live currently. And of course, they exclude millions of people around the world. And the other things, the other problem with the current models is that, they are top down and they're somehow, dysfunctional. which is being proposed by Professor Gordon in The Rise and Fall of American Growth. And they argue that probably winter is coming. And we have seen during the COVID crisis, winter has actually arrived. We have seen all top models of growth, the countries which have, which would, for, the countries for which were considered success stories for the rest of the world, they crumbled before COVID-19. And now there is a policy cry that, probably we should look for alternative, hybrid sustainable models of innovation. And that's why in 2000, United Nations, OECD, UNCTAD, they have talked about alternative forms of innovations, probably, which will take care of equality, which will take care of this climate crisis, and which will probably help us create sustainable, more greener future. And in this debate, we have seen the emergence of discourse which revolves around frugality, frugal innovations, low-cost innovations, and probably these grassroots and jugaad innovations. Very recently when COVID started, impacting lives around the world, there were a couple of papers which talked about frugality and frugal innovation. And one paper was published by Professor Bharti with Professor Harris in Nature journal. And they talked about this frugality, that frugal innovations are actually, emerging from different parts of the world to contain the crisis which are created by COVID-19. So this discourse about sustainability, smart growth, sustainable future, they open up a possibility of these alternative forms of innovations. Since the publication of the Theory of Economic Development by Professor Schumpeter, the whole discourse about innovation, it revolved around profit and market. In fact, the OECD definition of innovation till 2018, it was precisely the idea which is exploited in the market. So market profits were the heart of innovation discourse. But even now, the OECD definition, they have tweaked the definition of innovation. Now they say that, they have actually taken the market out of the definition. They say that any idea which is exploited and which creates value. Now value is, it's an open-ended thing. It could be environmental value, it could be social value, it could be psychological value, it could be use value, not necessarily the exchange value which Professor Schumpeter was talking about. So in this whole debate, I try to find out this frugality, and I try to blend it, like how firms are basically trying to blend frugality with digital innovations, with ICT innovations precisely, and how they are creating new innovation landscapes which are actually helping people at the grassroots and which are somehow aiding to create an inclusive future. So before moving forward, the question is, how do we conceptualize frugal innovation? Well, the terminology is new, but the core idea behind frugal innovation is not new. Adam Smith, John Stuart Mill, they have advocated frugality. In fact, Benjamin Franklin in the 18th century, he advocated for frugality. And during World War II, we have seen the Common Man's Clothes, CC41 scheme, which was launched in England. It actually was, frugality was encouraged at a state level. Various incentives are created for the people who will look for frugality and who will use resources, properly and in a very frugal way. Frugal innovation is basically a low-priced product which won't compromise with the sophistication of technology. And frugality is conceptualized at leveraging limited resources or lackluster institutions and achieving the ends that serves more people who have less. That is basically the definition about frugal innovation, that when you have institutional voids, when you have resource constraints, and while you avoid the institutional voids and resource constraints, and you create means for many using low resources, that is conceptualized as frugal innovation. And we have seen some examples. For example, Tata Nano car, which was an Indian car, it was considered one of the best example of frugal innovation, or Safaricom M-Pesa in Kenya, where the formal banking system was replaced using ICT innovations. And then we have these low-cost ECG machines. They are branded as, ICT. They're the best examples of frugal innovation. the three main challenges which actually encourage and motivate us to talk more about frugal innovation or low cost innovation is that, we find, particularly the developing countries, the states who are struggling with resource constraints. That's the first challenge, like how to overcome the resource constraints or capability constraints, or maybe the institutional voids. Second is the challenge of dealing with institutional voids. For example, IPR we're talking about is a huge challenge. And then the patents, IPR forms, the new entrants, they face immense challenge while dealing with these kind of institutions. And third is the need to address the needs of the bottom of the billion pyramid. How can we, meet the requirements of the millions of people at the bottom of the pyramid? These are some of the questions which actually encourage us to go into frugal innovations and low cost innovations. Now, how can we achieve these frugal innovations? In secondary innovation, for example, it could be, for example, Professor Lee, in his recent book, which was reviewed by Professor Lakhwinder Singh, he tells us that, these windows of opportunities precisely, or catch-up, or new areas of innovation could be explored or could be, created when there are some new windows of opportunities. For example, in Kenya, when the formal banking was not possible, the local Safaricom, M-Pesa founders, they thought of, replacing the traditional banking using mobile phones, and using by an SMS, it replaces the traditional banking system. Or it could be technological-led window of opportunity. Now, how this window of opportunity can be created? When new technology is introduced, people can invent a new use out of an existing technology, and they can probably create new window of opportunity. And this could be demand-led window of opportunity or institutional-led windows of opportunities. Similarly, in secondary innovation, we have seen in case of China, for example, some windows of opportunity, some innovations were created by localizing the foreign technology. For example, when Haier was manufacturing these refrigerators,
Unmute yourself, Sheikh. Please unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, no.
So Haier, it started manufacturing refrigerators in 1920, but initially the company was completely bankrupt. They were struggling with foreign technology, with foreign machines. It was very difficult for Haier to survive in a highly competitive market. And then they started manufacturing their own washing machines and refrigerators. But there were a lot of complaints. For example, complaint first was received by Haier from its customer that he's using the washing machine, but after using washing machine, he won't be able to rinse it in the morning harvest. So there was another complaint that his refrigerator is out of food because of rodents ate it all. So what Haier did was, they got, for example, the rural farmers, they were not able to wash their potatoes using the machine, or the people, they were, the rodents would eat all their stuff. And then looking at this public demand, the consumers' feedback, they targeted this consumers' feedback, they targeted this, non-consumption market, which Professor Christensen talks about, and they entered into those areas, and they created, these frugal innovations, these low-cost innovation for farmers, for people who had difficulties while washing their clothes in summers or in winters. And Haier has gone to produce washers that were able to peel potatoes, safely wash clothes typically meant for hand washing, and even design a model for herders in Inner Mongolia and Tibetan plateaus, which helps process yak butter. So these are some windows of opportunities which are created by the demands. But there could be some institutional-led windows of opportunity. For example, a state leads to and creates a new policy and new firms enter, or maybe there could be a new technology, as I pointed out. For example, in case of Kenya, when mobile phone was introduced, they discovered and invented a new use, and using these SMS services, they started transferring money from one place to another place. Now, these are some of the cases from China, like how this frugality, secondary innovation, they are blended together, and how they are lifting people out of poverty, how they are aiding to regional development. For example, I have a case of Taobao from China. You know, Taobao is basically a subsidiary of Alibaba company. It's a online platform where customers, consumers, they exchange products, they sell product. It's an online platform like Amazon. But you know, unlike Amazon, what Taobao has done, you know, they have identified certain villages in China. They have done resource and capability mapping of whole of China. For example, you have shoemakers located in one place. You have artisans of, you know, handcraft people in another place. You have, you know, people who are producing apple in another region. So they have, after, you know, doing this resource and capability mapping of China, the government of China, they have invested huge money creating and building infrastructure in those areas. And then the universities, you know, the title of today's webinar is Industry Academia, this triple helix model which we're talking about. This is precisely visible here in case of Taobao. You know, the government, the firm, they did this resource and capability mapping of China. Then private players like Taobao and Alibaba, they went there. The state started building infrastructure in those areas, and the universities and the people, you know, who were carrying some traditional capabilities, they were, you know, value was added to those capabilities from universities. University knowledge was blended with the knowledge which was outside, which was existing outside the university. And then they were somehow able to lift around 1 billion people out of poverty. And Taobao is considered one of the very successful models from China. You know, what Taobao did was, you know, not only selling platforms, you know, these goods on online platform, they identified Taobao villages. For example, many villages started concentrating around Shanghai, around Zhejiang province, where you have these capabilities and capacities and resources. And initially the number of villages was 3. So they started targeting particular villages. The whole focus was on those villages. And then they became the center for all, you know, economic activity which is taking place around those villages. And currently the number of villages which are branded as Taobao villages is more than 4,310. And last year's 2019 annual sales of online stores in Taobao village surpassed 700 billion yuans. This, the report which is produced by Ali Research Center, they said that the number of Taobao villages will surpass 20,000 to create more than 20 million jobs in the next 10 years. And now this is basically a grassroots startup model. You know, the manufacturing, the capabilities, the resources, they come from the grassroots. But the way firms are going and the way they're, you know, engaging with these grassroots farmers, with grassroots technicians, with grassroots artisans, by blending university and the state, is a model which I am sure, you know, can be emulated in other developing countries if state, university, and private players, you know, join hands. Of course, you know, the questions about inclusion, how these Taobaos are basically, you know, creating the impact. Of course, you know, a detailed study is still required to understand how these models are actually impacting economically without compromising with other values, for example, without disturbing their well-being or maybe the psychological peace and other things which are very important to document. These are the cases which I talked about. And the other interesting case, which is a Chinese success story, is of Xiaomi Red phones. You know, Xiaomi very recently, they surpassed Apple in terms of sales. Xiaomi in India, last year, they sell around 200 Xiaomi mobile phones per minute in India alone. And this Xiaomi phone, it's considered, you know, poor man's Apple mobile phone. The initial learning for Xiaomi came from Nokia, from Apple, from Samsung. But knowing that, you know, Samsung and Apple, they are for, you know, elite customers, only the, you know, top pyramid people can afford those elite mobile phones. And Xiaomi is actually giving exactly the same features, same apps, and same technology at a very low cost. So this blending of digital innovations using frugality, you know, reducing the cost without compromising the technical sophistication of the technology is probably a wonderful model which deserves academic and and policy attention from other parts of the world. And then there is a lot of papers which have talked about Taobao. For example, this Alibaba way, they have discussed in detail the emergence of Taobao and how this Taobao is actually leading to regional development. In this book, The Alibaba Way, Professor Edmund Phelps, who was given Nobel Prize in 2006, he has written a foreword for this book, and he has actually advocated that the cases, particularly Taobao, which is witnessed in China, was precisely the same innovation model which was witnessed in India during the emergence of Industrial Revolution. That people's knowledge, the innovations are coming from all parts of the China, and this whole movement of gross innovation becomes contagious, and it can actually lead to other parts of the world, and this leads to ultimately prosperity, and it creates a virtuous cycle of prosperity. And we have the last part of the presentation is how this frugal innovations have actually emerged during COVID crisis, how firms, individual innovators, independent innovators are learning from foreign technology, and how this democratization of innovation models have taken place during COVID. Of course, we know COVID has destroyed the existing business models. It has negatively impacted all top shot firms, but it has at the same time, offered us some glimmer of hope, some windows of opportunities, some ray of hope where we can talk about alternative forms of innovation models. For example, all these three people, Professor Ashchimmer, who is UNDP chief, Dr. Tedros, and UN General Secretary Antonio Guterres, they have talked about that, pandemic COVID-19, it requires complete response. If we want to overcome the crisis created by COVID-19, then innovation has to be the ultimate answer. We require innovation in industries, we require innovations in dealing with public health, we require innovations in overcoming the gaps which are created by COVID-19. So they have advocated that innovations has to be there. And in fact, UNDP has recently launched an innovation challenge that started looking for people's innovation. Doesn't matter who you are, where from you are, if you have a solution to overcome the crisis created by COVID-19, you are most welcome to submit the idea. And in fact, the winners have been already declared. And there was another paper which was published by one of my supervisors, Professor Saradindu Bahaduri and Professor Noringa from ISIS. In fact, they advocated that Europe, they started giving explanation why Europe should actually embrace frugality, because COVID-19, as I pointed out, had exposed the so-called successful innovation models, and now the policy and the debates about alternative forms of innovations are coming up. And these are the cases which we have witnessed during the emergence of COVID-19. For example, creating a hostel in 10 days in China, 23-bedded hostel, that was one of the best examples of frugality, because frugality is creating solutions in a very rapid time, repurposing the existing technology or reusing the technology. So we have seen, for example, India and Pakistan, when hostels were overcrowded with COVID patients, they repurposed their trains. The trains were converted into hostels, COVID hostels. And similarly, we have seen this case of MIT emergency ventilator event. The whole technicalities of this ventilator were put on the YouTube. And then there were people across the world, they started learning from these technologies, which is a successful foreign model, and it becomes a learning for countries like Afghanistan, Kenya. We have seen these girls from Afghanistan. They actually created their own ventilator, by repurposing the old car parts. So this case was picked up by BBC, and then we have another innovators from Kenya. They started using the low-cost innovations while for overcoming the crisis which are created by COVID-19. And in fact, in Kashmir, we conceptualized an innovation open challenge. It was supported by some local entrepreneurs, for example, Rahim, Araf, STC, and NIT Srinagar. We thought of looking for local solution because the whole global supply chain was disrupted. People were looking for ventilators. There was no space for patients in the hostels, and we thought of looking for these low-cost innovations, and we received almost 200 innovations from the people. For example, how to create a frugal ventilator, how to create these sanitizers, masks, PPEs, and some of the major takeaways from this whole innovation exercise was this innovation, it's ubiquitous, it's everywhere. Anybody can be an innovator, but the only thing is the initial learning. The other major takeaway for these whole innovations was the major learning for these innovations come from the foreign successful innovation models. For example, MIT, when MIT ventilator was put on the YouTube, the innovators from Kashmir, they went to the YouTube and they started learning from the technicalities of the MIT, but using the local resources, using the local capabilities, they tweaked the same model and created their own model in Kashmir. And then we have these masks and robots. The initial learning for all these innovations, they come from foreign. So that is precisely the secondary innovation theories concept, or the catching up concept, that you have a successful incumbent model, and then this model can probably be a source of inspiration to people around the world, and they can probably learn from it. Because developing countries, particularly a state like ours, we have resource constraints. We can't invest huge resources for creating original innovations. So what advice we get from innovation scholars, particularly from Professor Lee, that probably we have to invest and explore short cycle innovations. And short cycle innovations are possible precisely because probably we can learn from an incumbent technology. But the learning becomes difficult when you have, when Professor Walter was talking about patents, or maybe the other IPR forms. So, to avoid that patent institutional voids and to overcome the resource constraints, people are taking detours. And one of the detours which we have witnessed could be, blending frugality, going for low-cost innovations, exploring these windows of opportunities by learning from probably the successful innovation models. And the last part of the presentation, is the last slide, that what kind of methodology should we use to understand this frugality and secondary innovations. Very recently, I published my paper to to a journal, and the feedback I got from the journal was like, what is secondary innovations? Like, what is secondary in secondary innovations? And why should we blend frugality with secondary innovation when there are other forms of other theories? My precise explanation to that is secondary innovation is not as I pointed out, copying an original innovation. It becomes a springboard technology. Firms can learn, or maybe they can take inspiration from a particular model, and then they can, of course, discover their windows of opportunities. And we have seen in the history of innovation, for example, when America, France, Germany, and other European countries, they started learning from original inventions which are coming from England. And the whole exercise was, in fact, many firms, for example, France or Belgium, they started poaching innovators. They started copying them. They started stealing technology from England. And then we have America. These countries, they evolved by learning from an original innovation model. But then we have the case of railways. For example, railways was introduced in England. That was original innovation. But then when it entered France, it became a successful model in France and in America, but it failed in England, which was its original source. Precisely because the government started nurturing railway technologies in England, in France, and in America. That's why it became a successful model in America and France. But it failed in England because it was in the private hands. So we can learn from an original innovation, and probably we can create our own innovation landscapes, and we can probably be able to have more development, or we can probably have more, what Professor Christensen tells us, market creating innovations which lead to virtuous cycle of prosperity. And now this whole discourse can be learned.
Please wind up now.
Yes, we can learn from various theories. We can, there is an intersection of these theories. For example, we can blend frugality and So this intersection of three streams, for example, we can do this by merging technology innovation, institutional innovation, and social innovation literatures to argue that frugal innovation lies at the intersection of these three streams. We can learn from how technological, societal, and institutional fields are negotiating the spaces for frugal innovations. So this was the whole discourse. Thank you very much, Professor Lakhvinder.
Thank you, Dr. Sheikh Fayaz. We have learned from your presentation a long historical context in which you have put up your ideas related to frugal innovation. How relevant are the frugal innovation to understand the economic theory as well as the policy changes which are expected to happen. So I think that your long canvas to present the grand theories, the gaps that has emerged in these theories to not to able to understand the role of secondary innovations is very, very important. And then you have also used case studies. That is a very interesting way to understand the ways through which the frugal innovations are getting into center stage and affecting the market value also through the case studies. But one of the very important point which I was expected that you might have collected some cases from India, which I was expected to be presented when you are presenting case studies from China. So if you have made such a kind of comparison, why China is getting higher degree of success and compared to the Indian cases where the frugal innovations are quite common in India, but they are not being used at a mass scale. So I think that is a very, very interesting example if you find the differences between Chinese model and the Indian model of frugal innovation. And the why Indian model of frugal innovation is not succeeding the way it is succeeding there. However, you will find that in digital age, how the corona pandemic has allowed people to look inward and try to use their traditional knowledge with the modern knowledge, and then you will find that they have been for the time being able to succeed. But as soon as the vaccine is appearing, which is a modern technology, perhaps you will find that it will devastate all your frugal kind of innovation and all that. So you have to look into such kind of complicated relationship with the dominance of science-based innovations and the marginalization of the frugal innovations. However, you know that the market value system, as you have talked about, is emphasizing on individualism and individual values. But you'll find that most of the less developed countries still banking upon the collectivization and collective values. So they have a communitarian attitude and they usually work for each other and they work together. And they have developed a knowledge which is not yet, codified at all. And that is giving some kind of, uh, you know, uh, uh, birth to the new kind of innovations that help people to realize their own value, but that is not placed in the market economy. So do you think that Chinese model is expected to be replicated given the kind of institutional framework which India is having because of huge amount of diversity, as well as the communitarian attitude is very different in different communities of India. So with these words, I express my gratitude on behalf of the organizers that you have wonderfully made a presentation which is stimulating. A lot of ideas you have thrown for the participants to emulate and try to find it useful in using their own work when they are doing the research. So I expect that there may be some more questions from the audience. I would like to quickly take up one or two pointed questions if there are any, and then we will shift to the next presentation. So this is open for discussion. So anybody who would like to, Bharti would like to ask a question, I will ask, please go ahead. Bharti Chamra, please ask the question.
No, actually, sir, she is co-host, so might be she has written to the participant to ask questions.
Okay, okay. Yeah. So anybody who is interested to ask a question? Okay, then Sheikh, you can respond briefly to my questions which I asked you, and then we will, wind it up.
Yes, Professor. Thank you, Professor Lakhvinder, for your kind words and for summarizing it very nicely. Well, as far as Indian cases are concerned, I have already studied 2 cases, Abino and digital greens. They are basically trying to blend this digital technology, ICT, and trying to lift people out of poverty. But why they are not as successful, or why we don't have a Taobao case in India, is precisely because of the disconnect which is there between our actors and sectors. When we talk about the innovations, if you look at that, innovations from that systemic perspective, then you can see a huge disconnect. For example, I was Yes. So I was comparing the innovation policies of India with innovation policies of China. In fact, India was the first country to have a dedicated science policy statement issued in 1958. And then we have this technology policy statement of 1983. And 2003, we have this science technology policy. 2013, we have innovation policy. But China, now India is also talking about innovation policy 2021. The discussion has already started. China had started this long and medium-term plans in 2006, and there were some 18 objectives. And I was seeing that what objectives China has achieved, because that long and medium-term plan was launched in 2006 till 2020. India, on the other side, we had 2003 we have science technology policy, 2013 we have science technology innovation policy, and 2020 the goals which China has fixed in long and medium term document, all goals have been achieved by government of China by 2020. I was exploring all the goals which are identified in that policy document. Every goal has been achieved by the government. The folks by the center, the university engagement, and the people, and the knowledge which exists outside university, that complete that systemic framework. If you have to see, then I can say that you have a robust innovation system in China. The states are working for innovation, universities are aiding to the state, and the people, university, firms, private players, they come together and they have a mission-driven innovation policy. While as in India, we have a lot of innovation policies, a lot of technology statement policies, but if you look at the policies, how they're implemented, and there's a huge disconnect between the universities and the policymakers and the policies. For example, a very quick case of Kashmir. We have Kashmir University and NIT, very old. Kashmir University was set up in 1949. NIT was set up as RAC Engineering College in 1969. And then we have outside NIT and Kashmir University, we have these Pashmina shawl makers. Pashmina shawl is a very finest fabric which we sold export to almost all parts of the world. But Kashmir University and NIT, they had no idea about this Pashmina shawl weaving. They are not contributing or aiding to the Pashmina shawl industry. And Pashmina shawl industry, they don't know that there is an engineering department existing in NIT or in Kashmir University. And this whole disconnect, the government is not trying to overcome this disconnect, which is visible or witnessed there. But in China, they are making now Pashmina shawl making. And China is actually, they are manufacturing more Pashmina shawls than Kashmir is manufacturing. And the weavers from Srinagar, they are selling the imitated shawls in Kashmir and in Punjab and other parts of the world, the imitated Pashmina shawls, which we export from other parts of the world using the tag Kashmir, and we sell it to the whole world. So that disconnect is actually a problem which is holding us back. I think that is my observation so far. And that's why we don't have the models which we can see in China and India.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sheikh Fayaz. we have been benefited from your presentation in many ways. And I think that your talk was very stimulating, and you have summarized the whole history of the innovation process included in economic theory, as well as where it has gone wrong. And then you have also tried to incorporate the recent writings like Professor Conley's writings and all that. So I think that this is a very, very stimulating and very interesting presentation. I hope you will be able to write it up and make a good article out of it. So that is nice. Thank you very much for having very responsive in terms of discussion also. Now we would like to shift to the next presentation. I invite Professor Dr. Ruchi Sharma from the Indian Institute of Technology and Indore. I think she is going to make a presentation on the knowledge spillovers of foreign patenting on Indian firms, econometrics analysis using patent citation data. So I expect that this is empirically grounded presentation will be, making a lot of contribution to the area of knowledge spillover, where I have also a particular interest in this particular area, where, I try to look into how knowledge actually spillovers from developed countries to developing countries. But I expect that you are doing firm level analysis that is more microscoping and more interesting area. So I welcome you and invite on the behalf of the conference organizers to make a presentation taking 25 to 30 minutes only. Please.
Thank you very much, sir, for your kind words. And I'm sharing my screen. Please let me know if it is visible.
Yes, so visible.
So absolutely, sir, as you said, that it is in line with the question which you had from Professor Park following his presentation. And particularly the context is, if you look at the literature which has developed after the passing of the TRIPS agreement and its impact on the developing countries, what we find is that the most of the literature focuses on the developed economies, and then they take their flows to the, let us say, US, and then take their flows to the other developing countries. So the focus becomes a country like US, and whether it exports to the rest of the developing countries, or whether so it is exporting or not, so technology is being transferred through those exports or not, FDI is happening or not. However, when we look from the perspective of the developing countries, when we take a case in point like a country like India, and then we want to understand whether through these exports, whether through those patentings, actually transfers are happening or not, from the context of a country, that like in that state. Otherwise, what we see in the literature, that all the developing countries are being clubbed together, the aggregated results are being shown, and many times they are positive also. So we want to understand from a country's perspective at a disaggregate level. So that's exactly my research issue here. And the title is Knowledge Spillovers of Foreign Patenting on Indian Firms. We are using a patent citation data. This paper is actually a part of a project, which was a research program, which was funded by ICSSR. So we are thankful to them for the financial support they have given us. And my co-author is Danish, who was also my associate with in this particular project. So that's my brief content outline. We'll, after looking at introduction and review, I'll look at the specific hypotheses which are being raised, followed by the methodology. I'll come to the main key findings, and if more interest is shown, I can go back to the methodology part, and towards the end, we'll have certain discussions about the policies. So when we look about innovation and knowledge spillover, they play a very important role in the economic growth of an economy. And spillovers essentially occurs when a firm acquire information created by others without paying for it. So here we are talking about, the spillovers which happen out of the market mechanism. Though there may be a transfer, technology may be transferred through the formal means. Spillovers is something which happens to the others. Like for instance, when we talk about a new product being introduced in a market by, let us say, a foreign company, the domestic companies will also learn from it. They will look at it. They will see how the customers are responding to it, and then they may try to, through the demonstration effect, they might try to learn and also, change their own practices. So in that sense, there are formal and informal ways through which these spillovers happen. When we talk about the formal ways, then we are looking at, seminars, global collaboration work, licensing, trade, FDI. This term of technology transfer and technology diffusion, sometimes it gets very overlap, but we make a very stark distinction between them. When we say technology transfer, we are looking at maybe FDI happens or not, and then transfer, whether through this particular FDI, whether any spillovers happens or not. So we are making a distinction here. So I'll give you one example. For example, when we talk about foreign patent, so when the patents are being taken by the foreign companies in India, that we can say is a main of a transfer. Whether spillover happens or not is through whether those patents are being cited further by the Indian firms or not. So that is the kind of distinction we are making here. I will elaborate on it as we move along. So then essentially when we talk about spillovers, it is very difficult to measure them. And of course, Krugman has pointed out that knowledge flows are invisible. They leave no paper trail by which they can be measured or tracked. However, Jeffrey in his pioneering work along with his co-authors have made very specific efforts to measure these so-called trails of paper trail and to measure the spillovers. And essentially their idea is that patent citation data is a kind of a proxy for the knowledge flows. And based on that, there exists a wide range of literature. So like when we do our research in academia, we use various books, various research articles, and we cite them. And in the same way, when patents has been taken, when a particular inventor or an applicant, they apply for their patent, they also cite the literature which already exists. Now, the context of that citation is that if you look at the process of taking a patent, there is something called a patentability criteria, which involves 3 steps. The invention being novel, non-obvious, and also having an industrial use. So when we talk about novelty, there the idea is that the applicant or the inventor has to show that it is something new to the new to the world in that sense. That would means it would have certain context. It must have taken. So they would do what we call as a prior art search. So prior art search would mean essentially existing knowledge, what is already existing and people have been using them, how this particular work builds on that. And that is where the context of the patent citation also comes in. If the Indian patents, applicants, inventors, when they are patenting, whether they are using the existing patents, particularly coming from, those patents which have come from the foreign companies. So here in the Indian context, if we look at, the existing literature essentially talks about foreign direct investment as a major source of technology transfer. And even in the context of the TRIPS agreement, they look at if whether foreign direct inflows have increased or not, and what is the impact of that on the domestic firms. Essentially, they look at the total vector productivity, in increase of the domestic firms to capture these spillovers. Now, here the patents taken by foreign firms and used in the domestic market, again, we are arguing is an important source of technology transfer. And this foreign patenting has also tremendously increased, particularly in the context of the TRIPS agreement. So, so following from that, what we find is the multinational corporations are the major instruments through which this foreign patenting happens. And the use of patent citation for spillover analysis in that sense is relatively new as compared to other channels. And we have also seen that an economic indicator of patent data essentially has been become very prominent in last 40 years as which provides us a very unique information about the industrial innovation, though it is limited to the patent sensitive and high and medium technology industry. But again, even acknowledging that the restrictive use of the patent in specific industries, we have gone ahead with it because we want to understand whether the spillovers in those industries are also occurring or not. Of course, so patent is one, and then the next step is the patent citations. So which reflects on the spread of the knowledge. And as said earlier, it has been used now as an alternative empirical approach to study spillovers. There are various studies in that particular context. There is critique of patent citation data as well. And in that context, a study by Jaffe and his co-authors and Doggett have shown that in an inventor survey, the correlation between patent citation and actual knowledge flow, though may not be perfect, but they are indeed high. So the survey kind of highlights that yes, citation existing patents has been used by the the people who are citing them for the knowledge share. In the context of the companies, what we find is that Singh has used to understand bidirectional knowledge flows using the patent citation data. And their empirical analysis find that the knowledge flows from domestic firms to MNCs in US, and Germany is higher than the knowledge flows from MNCs to their domestic firms. So in the context of that study was essentially US, and they were looking at the bidirectional flow with respect to the other European as well as Japan in terms of their flows. Another study is by Brandstetter, who has looked at the foreign direct investment as a knowledge flows and trying to understand the Japanese firms' reaction to it. And the study has concluded that that there are positive flows, and in fact there are bidirectional knowledge flows also. So it is not only that the domestic firm learn from foreign firms, many a times foreign firms also learn from the domestic firm. Essentially here, when we look at the context of these studies, we find that the most of these countries are technologically very active and advanced countries. So in those countries, the bidirectional flows are much more prominent, whereby you may find that many European or Japanese companies are actually creating their subsidiaries so that they can learn from the domestic firms of, let us say, US in that way. However, our context is a bit different. So accordingly, we have modified our hypothesis. So other studies also by Alzavi and Yu and Wu, they have also looked at in the context of the Yu and Wu has looked in the context of China, the knowledge flows. So if you look at this review, there are specific gaps, particularly lack of research focusing on foreign patenting as a channel of the knowledge spillovers. So these studies, they have looked at the citation data, particularly from the interest of the spillovers within the countries and then the relationship between the domestic and the foreign firm. They have not looked at whether patent taken by the foreign firms could be an important source of the citation, as is in our case. And moreover, in the context of India, we find that the knowledge spillovers from foreign firms to Indian firms using patent citation level data identifying foreign patenting as a source of transfer and answering knowledge spillovers captured through citation is missing. So if we look at the Indian data, what we find is that from 2010 to 17, there has been a total patent granted increased by 73.53%, and resident patent also grew, and not only that, but non-resident patents also grown. In fact, if you look at the data from 15 to 16, there's non-resident patent constitute 85%. However, in the recent years, we have found that there's a trend, the more of the resident patents are growing. However, the share of the non-resident patents still remain more than 50%. Based on the literature, so we raise this following hypothesis: knowledge flows from foreign firms to Indian firms exceed flows from Indian firms to knowledge firms. Now, why we are saying this? Because our idea is that these foreign firms are essentially, had their origin in more technologically advanced economies of US, Europe, and Japan. And they would bring in, when they come to the India, essentially they would bring in their more advanced technologies with them. And so the citations would be reflecting more of a flows in that direction. And another one is that if these companies, have a subsidiary in India, in that context, the domestic firms will learn more because the subsidiary will be present in the domestic economy. And then they would be having their product being sold. There might be certain informal linkages with that. So that will lead to more spillovers as compared to the foreign companies which may not have the subsidiary in the country. So moving on from that, there is a whole lot of issues we have to sort out while looking at the data. The first major challenge which we face is that the Indian Patent Office does not have a very specific requirement of giving the citation. So if the patents are filed in Indian Patent Office, we were trying to figure out the citations in that. We did not get much help or data in that context. Most of the citations were made by the examiners, and that too in their first examination report. So the data then in that sense became very limited from the Indian Patent Office. So we moved on. We looked at the United States, US Patent and Trademark Office, because there is a very specific requirement that the earliest research has to be cited very clearly by the applicant. So then what we did that we at the USPTO now, if you want to understand what is Indian patent or not, it's a next level challenge. Here, if we look at the existing literature, many times they look at the inventor level data or assignee level data. So most research says that inventor level data is more authentic, whereby you look at the address of the inventor, and if it is Indian address, then you look at then you find say that it's a so-called Indian patent. However, our issue was, since we are looking at a firm's level data, and we also want to match it with the CMI data further. So what we have done is we have looked at the assignee level information, because assignee level information essentially is from the point of view of the companies. So assignees could be the companies for which the inventors would be working. So we would have first looked at the assignee level information from the USPTO. So we have collected data on that basis. We also looked at other patent office, including European, Japan, South Korea, and Chinese. And when we look, as we keep on going further down, what we find, we ultimately restricted to the information from the USPTO. Now, then information was obtained from for the total of 17,881 patents, and which has more than 3 lakh backward citations. So these citations were made to the earlier patents. Now, within that, there were citations which are given by the examiner and by the applicant. And once again, the literature suggests that the examiner citations will not be appropriate, particularly when we are trying to capture the knowledge spillovers. It would be relevant if we only focus on the applicant's citations. So that is when our focus, we removed the examiner citations, and essentially we looked at almost 2,51,000 applicant citations, and the examiner citations were being removed. So out of this, what we find is that there are 22,886 citations made to patent which have a family patent in India. Now, why is that important? Because if you go to our main hypothesis, we wanted to understand that if the patent is being taken in India, whether it spills over or not. So we want to understand that if the patent is being cited by, let us say, an Indian company, or even a subsidiary of the foreign company in the Indian context, whether that particular patent was taken in India or not, because that is the channel we want to explore for the transfer perspective. Essentially, if you look at the TRIPS model, it has increased the foreign patenting, and whether that spills over or not. So we further looked at how many of them have a family patent. Essentially, family patent, if you look at it, the meaning is that the similar patents has been taken across the geographies. So when we try and mapped out, we found only 9% of these patents has been taken in the Indian context, and they were particularly mapped to almost 4,487 patents only. So again, there is a limited, one can say that from there itself, that the technology transfers from those patents which has been taken in India are a bit limited. Now, considering that there are these many citations, we have to now, if you look at the methodology, there is a case control method which is being adopted in most of the studies, starting from Jasjeet Singh, and even before that also. So our study is mostly focused in the Jasjeet Singh paper, who has looked at the bidirectional flows between the America and the rest of the European and Japanese companies. So we also try to use the case control method. The idea behind the case control method is that if we suppose take only the citation which has been taken and study them, then there is a issue of a selection, right? So because these have already been cited. So how do we control for this kind of a selection bias? So we do this case control method, whereby we try to look at those patents which are in a very similar family, and also in a very having a very similar technological domain, which could have been cited. So we make that control, we create those controls, and then we try and understand how much of the citations has been made. So the further we use the logic model to understand the various factors or the variables which are leading to the citation. So before going into it, I will show you this particular graph. This is based on the analysis of the specific citations which we had. Out of this 22,000 citations which we were talking about. And so here what we find is something like this. This is how we are trying to kind of distinguish between the citations. One is like, if you look at this, these are the spillovers between the domestic firms. So let us say there's a company, these names are just suggestive. They are not from our, like, we can't, these are just suggestive in nature. So let us say a firm like Tata is, kind of citing the patents which are being by the Mahindra. So this is, the relationship here is DD, that knowledge spillovers from domestic to domestic. Before going further, I would like to point here that when it came to ownership, whether the company is foreign owned or Indian owned, we struggled a lot with the equity based definition, which is prominently used in the literature. So because many times the data was missing, and there were companies which are from Indian origin, but because they have higher foreign equity share of the foreign companies, they were being termed as foreign. So what we opted for is the origin based definition of the companies. So then there are the flows like this, like for instance, BMW India. So this is a subsidiary of the foreign company which is working in India, and it cites the patent which is originally belongs to Tata. So this is the flow from a domestic firms to foreign firm which is learning from the FI. Here is a foreign Indian, that means subsidiary of the foreign firm learning from the domestic firm. On the other hand, if now Mahindra cites a foreign subsidiary of, let us say, of the Ford, then that is like the domestic firm is learning from the foreign company which has a subsidiary in India. So, and if there is an interaction between the BMW and Ford India, so that means the foreign firms are learning from each other who has a subsidiary in India. Now, then if we look at the foreign firms on this, let us say from the rest of the world here, so there are two types of companies we are looking at. One is the one which is having a subsidiary, another one which is not having a subsidiary. So if the domestic companies cite from those companies directly from their parent firm, so that kind of flows, that is domestic, is learning from the foreign company, but that foreign parent, so it is citing, let us say, Ford US, but Ford has a subsidiary in India. So that kind of flows. On the other hand, if it cites, let us say, a domestic firm cites a foreign company parent, but it does not have a subsidiary in India, then of course the relationship between the foreign companies could also be divided on the same lines. For instance, the foreign company is citing its own parent company, and then these are self-citation which we removed from our analysis. And again, but here which shows that it is quite high. And then the another one is that the foreign company is citing another foreign company, and they're citing the parent company patent and not that of the subsidiary which is being taken. So that is FI, foreign Indian, that means the subsidiary is citing a foreign patent. That means they're citing the parent company which does not have a subsidiary in India. So again, the channels of the flows were, as you can see, that they were pretty spread out. And when we looked at our data, the percentage of foreign flows between domestic firms, Indian firms, and Indian foreign firms to domestic firm are relatively, you see that between, and domestic firms to foreign firms are around 3.5%, that is domestic firms. 1.3% was from foreign to foreign. Again, on merely 0.2 from foreign to domestic. Whereas in case of the domestic to FI, we still find certain percentages were high. So what we find is only few citations are made by the domestic, Indian firms to the foreign Indian firms. That means the subsidiary firms. And if it is the FP, that means it's the parent firm. The largest source of the citation is made by the foreign Indian firms to the other Indian parent firms that have presence in India. So essentially here also what we find is that the foreign companies are citing more of the foreign companies, and in self-citation, that is their own parent companies. When we looked at the percentage of knowledge flows from foreign patent firms having subsidiary in India to domestic firm and foreign parent not having a subsidiary, again the ratios are 14% and 5% only. So again, knowledge flows from foreign parent firms having subsidiary in India to other foreign Indian firms, and a foreign parent not having subsidiary are 59% and 13%, as I've shown in the graph also. So the highest percentage, once again 59%, shows the interaction among the foreign firms in the host country. Such firms have a multi-point competition, and then they end up gaining from each other. So they're gaining at, they are being competitive with each other in the different countries, and then again the knowledge is being shared between them. So then we have done further logic model, and this is results are supported by that. And what we find is that the knowledge flows between domestic firms are significantly larger than the knowledge flows from foreign Indian firms to the domestic firms. The probability to cite domestic firms by another domestic firm is higher than the probability of domestic firm citing a foreign Indian firm. The probability of knowledge gains from foreign parent that do not have a subsidiary is higher than a knowledge gained from a foreign patent than having a subsidiary. The probability of knowledge flows from foreign firms that do not have a subsidiary in India to foreign Indian is higher than the probability of knowledge flows from foreign firms that have a subsidiary. The inventor located in the same country, they cite each other, patents higher, and the probability to cite a patent when it belongs to the same technology domain and subdomain is high. Now, here what we find is that if we go back to our hypothesis, they are absolutely not very supportive of our hypothesis as such. And essentially one can look at that, one can conclude if you just want to focus on this ideas, then the domestic firms essentially do not benefit from foreign Indian firms. And the one reason could be the technological differences between these two. And in future, this aspect can be further explored, whether the technological differences between these firms is leading to lesser number of citations. And the case control, again, here what we have done, we have taken a sample of the citation and then created control. What we are trying to do now is to expand it so that we create controls for all the citations and then do our analysis back. But however, if we want to conclude from these results, our major conclusion would be that maybe patenting is something which various Indian companies have already picked up, and that has followed the last 20 or 25 years of consistent effort, even by the Indian government, to hold these workshops and to organize specific conferences regarding the awareness about the intellectual property rights, including patents. However, it has still not translated into a level whereby the Indian firms started using these patent documents as a mean to access knowledge or as a knowledge source for that manner. So essentially, these avenues are suggested to have more focused programs, because many a time you will find that the companies will just attend these kind of workshops and may not take them seriously, and make them more focused so that the teaching of how to learn from a patent document could be given. And again, Indian Patent Office also need to take measure to increase the dissemination of the information contained in the patent document. It is much more easy for us to access the patent document as USPTO and get information, whereas as compared to Indian Patent Office, it's a bit of a struggle, and it's far more difficult. And essentially, we can say that for the domestic and small firms, they can reduce the fees, or maybe tell them that for small and medium firms, if you want to access specific patent documents, maybe that could be provided for almost free or for a negligible charges. So again, the website could be made more friendly and faster so that easy to access knowledge. So I think the potential for companies to use the information is directly linked to how easily it is available, and which is not the case right now. So IPO also need to make aware about its role as a provider of easy access. If you look at the role which IPO has been playing currently, it is essentially of granting the patents and then maybe holding certain workshops just to inform about that, but whereby they play a very specific role, so that they also give an access to the knowledge, so that it becomes a public knowledge, and which is the major, one can say that, major role which is expected that the patents will play. Because if you look at the history of the patent policy, how they have evolved over a period of a time, one of the major reasons for introducing the patent was that apart from giving a monopolistic rights to the applicant and to the inventor, they will also provide the knowledge about the technology in the public domain, which can help in further building the knowledge. So I think that particular role which the Patent Office has also need to be highlighted, and they need to pay attention to that. And at international level, again, maybe India needs to highlight the inability of the TRIPS to transfer and then try to figure out how that can be done. And again, they can, they may open the discussion about the impact of TRIPS on technology transfer. Recently, I saw a working paper of WTO on the role of the TRIPS on innovation. But so maybe they also need to start this discussion or discourse as to whether TRIPS are actually leading to the technology transfer as was mandated by one of its objectives. And of course, following which discussion can undertake on identifying and implementing the measures to increase this technology transfer. So I hope I'm within my time limit. So with this, I would end my presentation. Am I still online? Sometimes I get this doubt.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ruchi Sharma, for presenting very rigorous econometric-based exercise on the knowledge spillovers. I think that you have opened up another possibility of reverse knowledge spillovers. And that is more interesting if you will, take up that exercise, that how Indian patents are cited by the firms of other countries within India as well as outside India. So I think that is a reverse knowledge spillover is the area which perhaps is less talked about, and perhaps that will be better if you will be able to do that. To my understanding, you have not shown the logit results. That could have been more useful if you have shown the table. One can have a more feel of that. But I think that one of the important area when you use the CMIE data set, you have to, look into the area of the high productivity firms and the low productivity firms, and then those who are patenting or those who are not patenting. And then you have to look into the comparison of this kind, and the how spillover effects actually benefits to the non-patenting firms as well. So I think that is the another area which one has to take it. But my understanding is that when you talk about patenting, it is the capability of the firm that is important, and that capability may be derived from where they are hiring some people. For example, if you are hiring from top institutions, okay, and those are doing innovations, and then those ideas are being patented, and I think that the capability where it is being generated and how that capability is being used, but that capability of the firm is fundamental in terms of those who are more productive in terms of patents, and their patents are being cited by the others, even the foreign countries. I think those capabilities need to be highlighted from the evolution, I can say evolution of capabilities, as well as including capability in the equation which you are estimating in the logit model. That is also very, very important, a policy variable. But I think that overall, the kind of policy issues which you have raised are very, very important, and that is emerging from your rigorous research exercise. So I would like to congratulate you for making this wonderful presentation as well as doing good research work. With these words, I would like to open it up the discussion for the audience to intervene and participate. And I think that Professor Walter is excited to, make interesting comments on it. So I invite now Professor Walter to speak on this presentation and ask some questions or raise some issues which are very important for the improvement of this paper.
Great, thank you very much. And this is a really interesting paper, very rich data set, and the questions are very interesting. And I think you're definitely contributing to the literature. So I basically have two sets of questions, one on your first hypothesis and the other one on the usefulness of citations as a measure of knowledge spillover. And a lot of people do use it. So, this is not just criticism of your paper. First, let's talk about that knowledge aspect. Are there any ways that you could also look at non-patent citations from engineering or other journals? Because to be frank, patents, if you've ever read a patent document, it reads not like a journal article. It very much reads like a real estate document. Like, I claim this is my property right, this and this. And of course, they have a requirement to explain in detail so that someone within your professional sphere can replicate your knowledge. I understand that part. So it is supposed to be clear. But at the same time, it is very, very mechanical, and it's not the same as an engineering article from a journal or a book. And so to the extent that you want to trace knowledge flows, I kind of like to compare the two, compare patents and non-patents, especially since patents are applied knowledge, and applied knowledge have very less spillovers than basic knowledge. Okay? Then the other thing is this: I agree that a citation can represent a knowledge flow because the patent is saying, okay, I depended on past inventions. They were very critical to my innovation. But there's another reason why you cite. You cite so that you don't get sued. You want to explain that you're a substitute. You're not infringing on the other person. So you're saying, I have a better soap. I have a better toothbrush. I'm not saying that I used your toothbrush to make my toothbrush. I made my toothbrush and it's distinct from your toothbrush. So don't sue me. It's my, so that's why we often, these companies cite each other. So I'm not sure how much knowledge interaction is there. Now, on my second set of questions concerns your first hypothesis. I like your second hypothesis. I have no issue with that. The first hypothesis, at least I would have thought that it's more of a fact than a hypothesis. The idea that foreign firms are more likely to, be cited by Indian than the vice versa. And so you have to control for a head start. If this were, let's say France and Germany, it's an open question. But since, an American company compared to an Indian company, American company had a big head start. So I think it really depends on how you maybe look at the sample period. So I would have thought initially, yeah, I expect the asymmetry to be there. And the second aspect about that is later you talked about how the probability of a domestic firm citing another domestic firm is higher than the probability of a domestic firm citing a foreign firm. I would also think, sure, perhaps the foreign company's product or invention is not as useful. But maybe this sort of relates to what I was talking about earlier, adaptation cost, and maybe that if a foreign invention comes into, let's say, in the Indian market, let's say it's Kentucky Fried Chicken or it's some other, well, you have to adapt it. Whereas a domestic, one state in India has a company, there's another company in another state of India. The two of them, there's a high probability they'll cite each other because maybe they are producing similar goods. Whereas if a Korean company is trying to market its product in India, well, they're going to have to adapt. They're going to have to change it so that it fits the demand for local products. So in that sense, there's a higher cost of maybe entry for the foreign firm, and so it's maybe that's something to control for. That's all. Otherwise, thanks very much for the great talk you provided.
Thank you very much, Professor Walter. Now I think that Ruchi Sharma is expected to, respond.
So thank you very much, Professor Singh, and thank you very much, Professor Park. So I think I would need to work on whatever suggestions has come from Professor Park. And as far as this hypothesis is concerned, when we started off, we were also looking at that, yes, it looks like as if that is what the situation is going to be. However, when we looked at the empirical data, when we found very different results, I mean, that is where our, we can say that confusion actually, begin to come up. And now, what we have done is here we have looked at, we have created case for a sample of the citation. So what we are trying to do is expand it. If possible, we will create a cases for all the citations, and then when we see whether our results are, again holding or not. And definitely, I would like to revisit the first hypothesis, particularly as you suggest that in review of the adaptation cost. I think that might be a very major factor in terms of not, getting the, at least or learning from the products which has been offered by the foreign companies. So I will definitely incorporate these, suggestions in my work. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ruchi Sharma, and I must thank all the participants, those who have been listening to this highly intense debate, which has started by Professor Walter Park. Then Sheikh Fayaz has gone into very deeply looking into a sweep of a generalized sweep, which I can say. And then you'll find that Ruchi Sharma and Walter has given a very intensive presentation, which are highly theoretically as well as empirically very sound, and have a substantial amount of public policy issues. I think that all the participants must have learned a lot from this particular session. I think that I have learned a lot, and I expect the same that all other participants who have listened very seriously, they must have learned a lot. And I think that this is a lead session which will allow the other participants in other sessions to carry forward the ideas which has been presented here. And when they work on their further research, they can carry a lot of ideas from this particular session. So with these words, I express my thankfulness to my presenters. They have been within time period. They have meticulously presented and given us the opportunity to listen their new ideas which has been developed. I also thank the audience for remaining patient for a long session, and I am particularly grateful to the organizer, especially Dr. Madan Denora, who has organized this conference wonderfully and given us an opportunity to interact with the learned scholars as well as interact with the participants. With these words, I hand over the session to Dr. Madan Denora. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, Professor Walter Park, Professor Lakhvinder sir, Dr. Ruchi Sharma, Dr. Sheikh Fayaz for this wonderful session, and all the topics which are discussed. Actually, they have too much important, especially in the context of India. When we discuss about this copyright, as of now, we have explored the formal channels of innovation R&D and patenting. But still we have not approached other channels geographical indicator and copyright in terms of methodology and techniques. Yes, Walter Park, your presentation will be definitely benefit us, and in future also we will maybe replicate or we develop appropriate theory to explore this particular area for Indian digital industry. Then I am also thankful to Dr. Sheikh Fayaz. Frugal innovation, informal innovation, they are very important, especially in the context of informal economy like India. We have a lot of scope, but we need appropriate research scholar who can work at the ground level. So definitely there will be some potential policy implication from your work. Then lastly, like Dr. Ruchi Sharma's presentation on this citation by patenting, Madam has already contributed a lot in the area of patenting as a proxy for innovation. She has a lot of very outstanding publication, including research policy, journal of policy modeling, economic modeling, and economics of innovation and new technology. Uh, Again, already ma'am mentioned in her presentation that there is certain limitation with Indian data. We scholar who are working in the area of innovation, we always struggle with patenting data. Although ma'am has also incorporated patenting data from USPTO, there is lot of work Indian Patent Office should relook. For example, there this InPass is there, which is their search engine. We always try to collect company level information from there, but lot of disturbance is there. It doesn't produce appropriate information. So and now there are active researchers both at international and national level who are looking for Indian data very keenly. So again, there must be certain implication both for IPO as well as Indian scholars who are working in this particular area. So again, thank you so much for accepting our invitation. We are we are in the remote area. I took this risk to organize such a event. I am thankful to Professor Park, this is very late night in the USA and still he is connected with us. So thank you so much, sir. We will look forward to collaborate with you once this crisis COVID situation will over. Then definitely we want again to you in the India. Earlier also he visited our innovation lab at IIT Indore for Gyan course. Thank you so much, sir. And many young scholars are also there with us. People are just watching this particular webinar through YouTube, and many of them also joined from Zoom. So they are also interested in this IPR and innovation related work. So again, thank you so much, and we hope that in future also we will you will be able to join us again. Thank you so much, sir. So now I think we formally end this session, and from tomorrow onwards, our presentation will start from 11 a.m. So again, all the participants who are present here, I request them to join the webinar by 11 a.m. Tomorrow again, we will have very good presentation both from industry as well as from academics. So thank you, all of you. Yeah,
Thank you, Madan. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Professor Park. Thank you, Madan.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
So we shall end this session.
Yeah, Danish. We should end this session, but still maybe we can wait for some time. Some recording and certain issues we should resolve before closing up.
Okay, recording is there though that we have to. Okay. See you tomorrow, everyone, at the same platform at the same time at 9:30. And for now, I think we shall.
Tomorrow we are meeting at 11.
11. Okay, yeah. 11 we are meeting. And what about this feedback form? Like, are we going to send personally?
Yeah, we will share the feedback form after the session.
So we will mail everyone, right?
Yeah, we will email everyone. We will share on different platforms.
Feedback form will be sent to everyone's mail, and kindly submit that feedback form. And tomorrow we are meeting at 11 o'clock. Yeah, bye. Thank you.
I
Thank you
hope
very
everyone that you enjoyed the session.
Yeah, thank you. Shall I end this?
Danish, you just be there. Other can like left.
Okay, okay. Now, yeah. So officially we can end this
Yeah,
session. Yeah.
officially. Danish, can you listen me?
Yes, yes.
So you just stop this streaming, live streaming on YouTube.